General Nathan Caldwell tore the tent flap aside and grabbed the strap of her rifle, hauling her up off the crate she was sitting on while soldiers around them froze in place. "Who gave you clearance to be on this base?" He roared, his face inches from hers. "You are under arrest for trespassing on a classified operation, and if I find out you had anything to do with what just happened out there, I will personally see to it that you rot in a federal prison for the rest of your life." The woman said nothing. She simply looked back at him with the kind of stillness that made grown men nervous. Before we go any further, if this story is pulling you in, please hit subscribe and follow it all the way to the end with me tonight. And do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and I read every single one. 6 hours earlier, none of them knew her name. 6 hours earlier, all General Nathan Caldwell knew was that his radio operator had gone pale, that the coffee cup in his hand had gone cold, and that somewhere in a mountain valley, 11,000 feet up in Kunar province, 8 of his best men were about to die. "Say that again," Caldwell said, his voice flat and dangerous. Lieutenant Reyes did not want to say it again. She had already said it once, and watching the general's face change had been bad enough. But orders were orders, and this was worse than orders. This was the truth, and the truth did not care whose stomach it turned. Sir Ghost Team is pinned down in the Nuristan corridor. They walked into a horseshoe ambush. Enemy fighters on 3 elevated positions, heavy machine gun fire, and at least 2 RPG teams. Air support can't get a bird in because of the terrain in the weather window. "They are surrounded, sir." Caldwell set the coffee cup down so hard it cracked. "That is not possible," he said. "That route was cleared 48 hours ago. I signed off on that route myself." "Sir, I know." "Then how in the hell does a 6-man Navy SEAL element walk into a horseshoe ambush on a route that was cleared 48 hours ago?" Nobody answered him because nobody had an answer, and the silence in that command tent was its own kind of alarm. Caldwell had spent 28 years in the military. He had led men into rooms that were still on fire. He had made calls that got people killed and calls that saved lives, sometimes in the same breath. And he had learned a long time ago that panic was a luxury a commander could never afford. But right now, standing in that tent with the radio crackling gunfire from a valley he could not see, something in his chest twisted so hard it nearly buckled his knees. Ghost Team was not just any team. Ghost Team was led by Lieutenant Mark Ferris, a man Caldwell had personally recommended for promotion. It included Petty Officer Dale Ruiz, 26 years old, married 4 months ago in a backyard in San Diego. It included Corpsman Danny Okafor, the medic, who had pulled 3 men out of a burning vehicle in Helmand 2 years earlier and never once talked about it unless someone else brought it up first. These were not numbers on a briefing slide to Caldwell. These were men whose faces he knew. Men whose families he had shaken hands with at homecoming ceremonies. And right now, all 6 of them were trapped on a mountainside with enemy fighters closing in from 3 directions. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing that General Nathan Caldwell could do about it from where he stood. "Get me eyes in the sky," he snapped. "I don't care what it takes." "Sir, we're trying the drone feed is being jammed intermittently. We're getting partial video." "Then give me partial video." The screen flickered to life, grainy and broken static eating through half the frame. Caldwell leaned in so close, his breath fogged the monitor. He could see muzzle flashes. He could see men moving low behind rock formations that offered almost no real cover. He could see in the corner of the frame a figure go down, and his heart stopped so completely he thought for one horrible second that it might not start again. "Who was that?" he said. "Who just went down?" "Unclear, sir. The feed's breaking up." "Find out." Static. Gunfire distorted through the speakers, sounding less like a battle and more like the world tearing itself apart. And then through the chaos, a voice ragged and desperate, barely holding together. "Command, this is Ghost One. We are combat ineffective. I say again, we are combat ineffective. We have 1 man down. We are taking fire from the North Ridge, the East Ridge, and what I think is a 3rd position we can't identify. Request immediate air support, over." Caldwell grabbed the radio himself. "Ghost One, this is Caldwell. Talk to me. What's your status?" A pause. Too long a pause. Then Ferris's voice again, and Caldwell could hear something in it he had never heard from that man before. Fear. Real fear, the kind that soldiers learned to bury so deep that hearing its surface was like watching the ground open up. "General, we're not going to make it out of here without air, and air can't get to us." We are out of options. You have options as long as you have breath in your lungs, Lieutenant. Do you understand me? Sir, with respect, I don't know how much longer that's going to last. The line went dead with a burst of static and gunfire, and Caldwell stood there holding the radio like it was the last rope on a sinking ship, and for one unbearable moment, the most powerful man in that command post had absolutely no idea what to do. Colonel Briggs, his executive officer, stepped up beside him, his voice low. Sir, we need to consider that we may lose this team. We are not losing this team, Caldwell said. Sir, I understand, but if the enemy has 3 fixed positions with clear lines of fire onto our men, and we have no air, no artillery range, and no ground reinforcement within 2 hours. I said we are not losing this team, Colonel. Briggs fell silent, but the look on his face said everything Caldwell already knew and refused to accept. Somewhere in that valley, 6 men who trusted their chain of command with their lives were about to pay for a decision that had gone catastrophically wrong, and there was nothing anyone in that tent could do to stop it. And then the radio crackled back to life, and everything changed. Command, this is Ghost One. Be advised we are receiving friendly fire support from an unknown position. I say again, unknown friendly is engaging enemy targets. We do not have a call sign for the shooter, over. Caldwell blinked. Say again. Sir, somebody just took out the machine gun team on the North Ridge with 1 shot. 1 shot, sir. We don't know who it is. The tent went quiet except for the hiss of the radio. That's not possible, Briggs muttered. There's no other friendly element in that grid. Then somebody better explain to me what the hell is happening on that mountain, Caldwell said. Because right now I have a team pinned down by 3 enemy positions, and something out there is killing my enemies for me, and I don't know who to thank or who to court-martial. On the broken drone feed, another muzzle flash lit up a position on the eastern ridge, and a second later that position went silent. Not suppressed, silent, gone. The kind of gone that only came from a shot that landed exactly where it needed to. Ghost One, command status on the East Ridge. Command, East Ridge is neutralized. Whoever this is, they just saved Ruiz's life. He was about to be flanked, and this shooter took the guy out before he even got a shot off. Caldwell felt something loosen in his chest just slightly, just enough to let him breathe again. But it was immediately replaced by a different kind of tension. Somebody was out there, somebody with a rifle and a level of precision that bordered on impossible, operating from a position nobody had authorized, engaging targets nobody had assigned, and saving the lives of 6 men who had moments ago been as good as dead. Get me a location on that shooter, Caldwell ordered. I want to know who is on that ridge right now. Sir, we're trying to triangulate, but whoever it is, they're not on any comms we can access. Then find them the old-fashioned way. The gunfire from the valley continued, but the rhythm of it had changed. It was no longer the chaotic, overlapping fire of an ambush closing in. It was becoming something else, something more deliberate, punctuated every few seconds by a single shot that landed with brutal surgical finality. Enemy fire that had been raining down on Ghost Team from 3 directions was being methodically, relentlessly silenced one position at a time by someone who was not missing. Command, Ghost One, be advised, 3rd position, the one on the western outcrop, just went dark too. That's 3 for 3, sir. Whoever this is just cleared every fixed position around us. Caldwell stared at the radio like it might grow a face and explain itself. How far is that western ridge from their position, Lieutenant? There was a pause, and when Ferris came back on, his voice had a different quality to it now, something close to disbelief. Sir, we're estimating that shot came from over 2,000 yards out. Maybe more. I've never seen anything like it. Whoever this is, they are not human. 2,000 yards. Caldwell had spent enough time around military marksmen to know exactly what that number meant. A shot at that distance was not just difficult. It required accounting for wind that shifted 3 or 4 times over the length of the bullet's flight, for the curvature of the earth itself, for humidity, for elevation change, for the almost imperceptible drop of a bullet traveling for nearly 3 full seconds before it found its target. There were perhaps a handful of people in the entire United States military capable of making a shot like that reliably, let alone 3 of them in a row under fire in deteriorating light. Sir, Briggs said quietly, standing close enough that only Caldwell could hear him. If that's real, whoever's out there isn't just good. That's world class. That's the kind of shooter you read about in classified files, not the kind you find wandering around an active combat zone with no call sign. I don't care what kind of shooter they are, Caldwell said. Right now, they're the only reason my men are still breathing. The radio crackled again. Command Ghost 1, we are moving. Repeat, we are moving. All three fixed positions confirmed, neutralized. We have a path to the extraction point requesting bird status. Bird is inbound. ETA 6 minutes, Reyes called back. And for the first time in what felt like an hour, Caldwell allowed himself to believe that his men might actually walk off that mountain alive. But 6 minutes on a battlefield could be a lifetime, and everyone in that tent knew it. Command, contact, we've got movement on our 6 small element, maybe 4 to 6 fighters. They weren't part of the original ambush. They're coming in from the ridge behind the extraction point. Caldwell's stomach dropped. A second wave. Of course there was a second wave. Nothing about this mission had gone the way it was supposed to, and there was no reason to expect that luck would suddenly hold now, not with his men exposed and moving toward a landing zone with a fresh group of enemy fighters closing in behind them. Ghost 1, do you have eyes on that element? Negative, sir. They're using the terrain. We can hear them, but we can't get a clean shot. We are exposed out here. I need that bird now. And then through the static, through the chaos, a single shot rang out again. Then another. Then a third, spaced with a rhythm that felt less like panic and more like a metronome ticking down the final seconds of somebody else's plan. Command, be advised that unknown friendly just engaged the second element. We're hearing return fire stop. I think they just took out 3 shooters in under 10 seconds over. Nobody in the tent said anything. There was nothing to say. What they were hearing did not fit into any framework any of them understood, and the shock of it held the entire command post in a strange frozen silence. Command, this is Ghost 1, be advised, extraction point is clear. I say again, extraction point is cleared. We are moving to the LZ now. Thank God we are moving. Caldwell exhaled a breath he did not know he had been holding for the last 20 minutes. Get that bird on the ground, he said. Get my men home. The helicopter's rotor wash could be heard faintly through the radio as it touched down, and for a few minutes the command tent listened to the sound of 6 men scrambling aboard, wounded but alive. The corpsman's voice cutting through, calling out vitals. Ferris, counting heads, confirming every single one of his men had made it onto that aircraft. Command, this is Ghost 1. All personnel accounted for. We are wheels up. Repeat, all 6 souls aboard, and we are wheels up. A cheer went up somewhere behind Caldwell. One of the junior enlisted men unable to hold it in, and normally Caldwell would have said something about maintaining bearing in a command post. But right now he could not bring himself to care. His men were alive. All 6 of them. Against every possible outcome that valley should have produced, his men were coming home. But relief lasted only as long as it took Caldwell's mind to catch up with what had actually happened, and when it did, a colder, sharper question rose up to replace it. Who had saved them? I want that shooter's position pinpointed the second that bird lands, Caldwell said. I want to know who was on that ridge, and I want to know right now. Sir, Reyes said carefully, we're already tracking it. Whoever they are, they didn't leave. They held position through the entire extraction, covering Ghost Team, until the bird was clear, and they're still there now. Still there? Yes, sir, not moving. Caldwell felt something shift in his gut, something that was not quite suspicion, but was close enough to make his jaw tighten. An unidentified shooter with world-class precision, operating alone deep inside a hostile valley, saving an American team from an ambush that should never have happened in the first place, and then simply staying put as if waiting to be found. That was not the behavior of an accident. That was the behavior of someone who had been there on purpose. Get a security element to that position, Caldwell ordered. I want that shooter brought in. Now. It took 40 minutes to get a team up the ridge, 40 minutes during which Caldwell paced the length of that command tent. So many times Briggs finally stopped watching him and simply stared at the radio, instead waiting. When the call finally came through, it was not what any of them expected. Command, this is Recovery 1. We have made contact with the shooter. Status, Caldwell barked. There was a pause, and in that pause, Caldwell heard something strange in the voice on the other end. Not alarm, something closer to confusion. Sir, the voice said slowly, it's a woman. The tent went dead silent. Say that again. Sir, the shooter is a woman. She's alone. She's got an M82 set up on a bipod, and she's just sitting there, sir, cleaning the weapon. She hasn't said a word. Caldwell felt heat rise up the back of his neck, a heat that had nothing to do with the desert and everything to do with the sudden, overwhelming need to understand what in the hell was happening on his battlefield. "Bring her in," he said. "Bring her to my command post personally. I want to see her myself." "Copy that, sir. Moving now." Caldwell set the radio down, and for a long moment, he simply stood there, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of a night that had already defied every rule he thought he understood about warfare. Somewhere out there in the dark, an unidentified woman with a weapon that most special operators trained for years to master had single-handedly dismantled an ambush that outnumbered and outpositioned his men 3-1, and she had done it with the kind of calm precision that suggested this was not the first time she had done something like it. "Sir," Briggs said quietly, "with respect, whoever she is, she just saved 6 of our men's lives. Maybe we should—" "I know what she did, Colonel," Caldwell snapped sharper than he intended. "That's exactly why I need to know who she is, where she came from, and why an unauthorized shooter with that level of skill happened to be exactly where she needed to be tonight." He did not say the rest of the thought out loud, but it sat in his chest like a stone. Because the timing bothered him, not the miracle of it, the precision of it. Somebody who could make 3 consecutive shots at over 2,000 yards under fire and fading light, engaging targets from multiple angles without a single miss, was not an accident of circumstance. That kind of skill came from years of training that very, very few people in the entire military possessed. And that meant she had known. Somehow, before the ambush ever happened, she had known enough to be there. The tent flap moved, and Caldwell turned every muscle in his body coiled tight, ready for whatever explanation was about to walk through that door. What he was not ready for was how young she looked. Not young in a way that suggested inexperience, but young in a way that made the weight of what she had just done feel even more impossible. She walked in flanked by 2 members of the recovery team, her rifle slung carefully over one shoulder, her uniform bearing no unit patch, Caldwell recognized. She did not look afraid. She did not look defiant either. She simply looked in a way that unsettled him more than either reaction would have calm. "Sit her down," Caldwell said. "Nobody leaves this tent until I get answers." She sat without being told twice, setting the rifle carefully across her lap, the way someone might set down something precious, and began almost absently wiping down the barrel with a cloth she had pulled from her vest, as though the last 3 hours had been nothing more than a routine training exercise. That more than anything was what broke Caldwell's composure. He crossed the tent in 4 furious strides and grabbed the stern of her rifle, hauling her up off the crate she'd been sitting on. Around them, soldiers who had been quietly watching suddenly went rigid, unsure whether to intervene in whatever was about to happen between their general and the stranger who had just saved 6 of their brothers. "Who gave you clearance to be on this base?" Caldwell roared, his face inches from hers. "You are under arrest for trespassing on a classified military operation, and if I find out you had anything to do with what happened to my men tonight, I will see to it personally that you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Do you understand me?" She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him, steady and unblinking, and said nothing at all. "I asked you a question," Caldwell said, his grip tightening on the strap. "Who are you?" The silence stretched thick enough to feel, and for a moment Caldwell thought she might refuse to answer entirely, might simply let him rage himself out the way an experienced interrogator lets a suspect exhaust themselves before the real conversation begins. But then her eyes flicked just briefly down toward her own collar, toward a small insignia pin there that Caldwell had not noticed in the chaos of the moment. It was small, understated, the kind of pin most people in that tent would have walked past without a second glance. But Caldwell was not most people. He had spent 28 years in Special Operations Command. He had sat in briefings that most 4-star generals never saw. He had signed off on programs so classified that even the existence of their names was restricted to a handful of people in the entire Department of Defense. And the symbol on that collar, small as it was, plain as it looked to anyone who did not know what to look for, was one he had only ever seen twice before in his entire career. It belonged to a program that, as far as most of the military was concerned, did not exist. Caldwell's hand slowly loosened on the strap. The color drained slightly from his face. "Where did you get that pin?" he said, and his voice, moments ago thunderous with fury, had dropped to something quieter. something that sounded almost afraid to ask the question it needed to ask. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, betraying nothing. "I earned it, General," she said, "the same way anyone in that program earns it. Through blood, through years nobody will ever know about, and through nights like tonight when the official record will say nothing happened at all." Caldwell released the strap entirely and took a step back, and every soldier in that tent watched their general, a man who had faced down insurgent commanders and briefed presidents, without breaking a sweat, look at this woman as though the ground beneath him had just shifted. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "That program was shut down years ago. There's no record." "There's no public record," as she said, "and there never was supposed to be." "Then who authorized you to be in that valley tonight?" For the first time since she had walked into that tent, something changed in her expression. Not fear, not defiance, something closer to grief, buried deep and controlled, the kind of look a person wears when they know something terrible and have been carrying it alone for far too long. "Nobody authorized me, General," she said. "I wasn't supposed to be there at all. I was supposed to be 3 valleys west of that ambush running an entirely different mission. But 2 days ago, I intercepted something that told me your men were about to walk into a trap that somebody inside your own command had helped set. And I had exactly one choice to make: follow my orders or save 6 men who had no idea they had already been betrayed." The tent went absolutely silent. Caldwell felt the words land like a physical blow, each one landing harder than the last, until he was standing there, staring at a woman he had minutes ago threatened with federal prison, now realizing she might be the only reason any of his men were still alive to tell the story at all. "Betrayed," he repeated the word, tasting foreign in his mouth. "By who?" She held his gaze without blinking. "That," she said quietly, "is what I've spent the last 3 months trying to find out. And General, I don't think we're finished tonight. Not even close." Somewhere outside the tent, the wind picked up, rattling the canvas walls, and Caldwell realized with a cold, creeping certainty settling into his chest that the 6 men he had just brought home safely were not the end of whatever was happening. They were only the beginning of it. He looked down at the pin on her collar one more time, then back at her face, searching for some crack in that impossible calm, some sign of the lie he desperately wanted this to be. He found none. "Lieutenant Commander," he said slowly, reading the rank insignia he had somehow missed entirely in the chaos of the last hour, "you're going to sit down and you're going to tell me everything starting from the beginning, and God help whoever did this, because if what you're saying is true, there is a traitor somewhere inside my command, and I am going to find them." She nodded once, set her rifle down carefully across her knees, and for the first time that night allowed herself the smallest, weariest exhale, as though some enormous weight she had been carrying entirely alone for months had finally found somewhere else to rest. "My name is Claire Whitmore," she said. "In general, before you hear anything else tonight, you need to understand one thing. The ambush that almost killed your men wasn't bad luck. It wasn't bad intelligence. Someone gave the enemy that route on purpose. Someone who had access to information that only a handful of people on this base could have had." Caldwell felt his blood run cold. "Give me a name," he said. Claire looked at him steadily, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 3 months spent alone in the dark, watching, waiting, piecing together a truth nobody else wanted to see. "I don't have a name yet, General," she said, "but I have a list, and you're on it too until I can prove you're not." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over the entire command post, and Caldwell, a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers across 2 decades of war, found himself for the first time in longer than he could remember, with absolutely no idea what to say next. Outside, the wind howled against the canvas walls of the tent, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the wire, the person responsible for tonight's ambush was still out there, still hidden, still believing their secret was safe. They had no idea that the woman they had underestimated, the one meant to die quietly in that valley, alongside 6 SEALs who were never supposed to make it home, was already 3 steps ahead of them, and she was not finished yet. Caldwell did not move for a long moment. The words sat there between them, heavier than anything he had heard all night, heavier than the gunfire, heavier than the 6 minutes he had spent believing his men were already dead. "Say that again," he said quietly. "You heard me the first time, General. I want you to say it again anyway." Claire held his eyes without blinking. "Everyone with direct access to Ghost Team's route timing and insertion point is on my list until they're cleared. That includes you. That includes Colonel Briggs. That includes everyone standing in this tent right now, And I am not going to apologize for that because 3 months ago, I made the mistake of trusting the wrong person's clearance level and it got someone killed. I am not making that mistake twice. Briggs, who had been standing off to the side with his arms crossed, uncrossed them slowly. Now hold on just one damn minute. Colonel, Claire said, not unkindly. I understand this is difficult to hear. It's difficult to say. But 6 men nearly died tonight because somebody in this command structure decided their life or their money or whatever it was they were promised mattered more than the men wearing this uniform. And until I know who that person is, I have to treat every single person with access as a possibility, even the ones I don't want to. You think I'd sell out my own men? Briggs's voice cracked with something raw, something that sounded less like anger and more like disbelief curdling into hurt. I have given 22 years to this uniform. I buried my own brother in it. I know, Claire said, and I'm sorry, I truly am. But sorry doesn't bring anybody home, and neither does trust that isn't earned through evidence. So if you want to help me clear your name in the next 10 minutes, instead of the next 10 hours, you're going to sit down and you're going to answer my questions. Caldwell watched the exchange with his jaw tight, his mind still catching up to the fact that a woman he had grabbed by the rifle strap 20 minutes ago was now effectively running his command tent. Under any other circumstance, he would have shut this down immediately. He would have pulled rank, put her in restraints, and sorted out the truth through proper channels with proper oversight and proper paperwork. But 6 of his men were alive right now because paperwork and proper channels had already failed them once tonight. Everybody out except essential personnel, Caldwell said, his voice carrying that particular register that made junior soldiers move without thinking twice. The tent emptied in under a minute until it was just Caldwell, Briggs Reyes, and Claire standing in a rough circle beneath a single swinging light bulb that flickered every time the generator outside coughed against the wind. Start from the beginning, Caldwell said. All of it. I don't care how classified it is. Tonight I outrank whatever program put that pin on your collar. Claire almost smiled at that, a small, tired thing that vanished as quickly as it appeared. General, respectfully, you don't. Nobody outranks that program. Not even the Secretary of Defense gets a full briefing on it. But I'll tell you what I can because right now you need to understand what you're dealing with more than I need to protect a classification level that already cost me 6 months of sleep. She sat down on the same crate she'd been sitting on when Caldwell first burst in, and this time nobody moved to stop her. 3 months ago, she began, I was operating independently out of a forward position in Nuristan province running long-range surveillance on a network we believe was funneling weapons and cash through 3 provinces using couriers who looked like nothing more than farmers and traders. It was slow work, boring most days. Watch log report, watch again. And then one night I picked up a transmission that didn't belong. Didn't belong how? Reyes asked. It was using an encryption pattern I recognized. Not enemy encryption, ours. An old NATO standard cipher that had technically been retired 2 years earlier, but that a few legacy systems still defaulted to if nobody bothered updating them. Somebody was transmitting operational data using an outdated American encryption key, and it was being received by a node inside territory we had no reason to believe had any friendly assets. Caldwell felt something cold settle behind his ribs. You're saying someone transmitted classified information using our own systems straight to the enemy? I'm saying somebody transmitted classified information that looked exactly like ours using a key that only someone with legitimate access could have possessed, and it went somewhere it should never have gone. I couldn't decrypt the full payload that night. I only caught fragments, coordinates, a partial call sign, and a timestamp window that didn't match anything I could explain. What was the call sign fragment? Caldwell asked, already dreading the answer. GH and then static. That's all I got before the signal dropped. Nobody in the tent said the word out loud, but everybody was thinking it. Ghost. Ghost Team's designation had existed for exactly 6 weeks, created specifically for this rotation known only to a small circle of people with the clearance to plan special operations movements. That's not possible, Briggs said, but his voice had lost its earlier conviction. That designation wasn't even finalized until 11 days ago. I know, Claire said, which means whoever intercepted it or whoever leaked it had access within the last 11 days. Not months ago, recently, which narrows the list considerably, Colonel. And it's the reason I've spent every night since then trying to figure out who on this base had both the access and the motive. Caldwell pulled a folding chair toward himself and sat down heavily, feeling 28 years of certainty about his own command crumbling in real time. How many people had access to that designation in the route plan? According to the operational order I managed to get eyes on, Claire said 7, yourself, Colonel Briggs. Lieutenant Reyes is the radio operator responsible for relaying coordinates. Major Harmon in intelligence, Captain Doyle in logistics, who would have needed the route to coordinate resupply timing, Warrant Officer Pitroff, who handled the drone tasking, and Sergeant First Class Whitfield, who managed communication security. 7 people, Caldwell repeated. 7 people I have worked with, some of them for years, and one of them just tried to get 6 of my men killed. Maybe, Claire said carefully, or maybe one of them is being used without knowing it. Compromised systems don't always mean a willing traitor, General. Sometimes it means somebody's password got stolen. Somebody's laptop got compromised on a supposedly secure network. Somebody clicked something they shouldn't have. I've seen both kinds of leaks, and until I know which one this is, I'm not going to walk into this base and start pointing fingers at people who might be victims themselves. Reyes, who had been quiet through most of this, finally spoke, her voice tight. Ma'am, with respect, I was the one on the radio tonight. I heard those men almost die in real time. If you're telling me one of us did this on purpose, I need to know who, because I am not going to sit in that comms chair every night wondering if the person next to me is the reason my friends don't come home. I understand, Claire said, and there was something in the way she said it, some quiet weight underneath the words that made Caldwell look at her more closely. Believe me, Lieutenant, I understand better than you know. What does that mean? Caldwell asked. Claire was quiet for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice had changed, dropped into something lower. Something that sounded like a memory she had not planned on sharing tonight, but could no longer hold back. 4 years ago, I was part of a joint element operating near the Pakistani border. We had a source, a good one, reliable for almost a year, feeding us accurate information that saved lives more than once. And then one operation based entirely on that source's intelligence walked directly into a kill zone that had been prepared in advance. 3 men died. One of them was my spotter, my partner, the person who had watched my back on every single mission for 2 years, and I watched him bleed out on a mountainside because somebody I trusted sold information about a mission that only a handful of people knew about. The tent went silent except for the low hum of the generator. We found out later, Claire continued, that the leak wasn't the source. The source was innocent. The leak was someone inside our own command who had been feeding information to a middleman for money, small amounts at first, then larger ones until it added up to enough to get my partner killed for a fraction of what his life was actually worth. And the man who did it, General, nobody suspected him. Not for 1 second. He was decorated, respected. He had commendations on his wall and a photo of his kids on his desk, and every single person on that base would have sworn on their own life that he was the last person capable of something like that. What happened to him? Caldwell asked quietly. He's dead now, Claire said. But that's not the point. The point is that I learned the hard way, and the worst way a person can learn something, that betrayal doesn't wear a mask, General. It wears a uniform just like everybody else's. It shakes your hand at the promotion ceremony. It laughs at your jokes in the mess hall. And it will look you dead in the eye and lie to your face while men it's supposed to protect are dying because of what it did. So when I tell you I have to treat every single person on that list as a possibility, including you, including Colonel Briggs, including myself, if it comes to that, I need you to understand that I'm not doing that because I enjoy it. I'm doing it because I've buried people I loved for not doing it soon enough. For the first time since she had walked into that tent, Caldwell saw something crack in the calm, controlled surface Claire had maintained through everything that had happened tonight. It was brief, a flicker of grief crossing her face before she pulled it back under control. The same discipline that had let her make 3 consecutive shots at 2,000 yards under fire now used to bury a wound that clearly had never fully healed. All right, Caldwell said finally, and his voice had softened just slightly, the fury from earlier, replaced by something closer to grim resolve. Then we do this your way, 7 names. We start eliminating them one at a time until we find whoever did this. Where do we start? Claire looked up, and the moment of vulnerability was gone, sealed back beneath the same discipline that had carried her through the last 3 hours. We start, she said, with whoever's missing from this tent right now. Caldwell frowned. What do you mean? I mean, 7 people had access to that operational data, General, and in the 20 minutes since your men landed safely back on this base, 6 of those 7 have shown up here one way or another. Colonel Briggs is standing right in front of me. Lieutenant Reyes has been on comms the entire time. You've been here since the ambush started, which means 3 others should have made their way to this command post by now to check on the outcome of an operation that nearly resulted in 6 American deaths. Curiosity alone should have brought them running. And they haven't, Caldwell said slowly. Major Harmon hasn't, Captain Doyle hasn't, and Warrant Officer Petrov hasn't either. Reyes was already moving toward the radio. I'll call them in. No, Claire said sharply, and Reyes froze. If one of them is responsible for tonight, and we send out a call summoning them to this tent specifically, we tip our hand. Whoever it is will know we're looking, and they'll have time to cover their tracks before we ever get close. We need to find a reason to bring all 3 of them here. That doesn't sound like an investigation. Caldwell thought for a moment, then turned to Briggs. Colonel, call a debrief. Standard post-operation review, mandatory attendance for all section leads with access to the mission planning documents. Make it sound routine. Make it sound like exactly what it should have been anyway. Briggs nodded, some of the color returning to his face now that he had a task in front of him instead of an accusation. Give me 10 minutes. He left the tent, and Caldwell turned back to Claire, studying her in the dim light, trying to reconcile the calm, controlled woman in front of him with the impossible marksmanship he had witnessed less than an hour ago and the raw grief she had just revealed underneath it all. You said you weren't supposed to be in that valley tonight, he said. You said you intercepted something 2 days ago that told you my men were walking into a trap. Why didn't you report it through proper channels? Why handle this alone? Claire's expression tightened. Because 2 days ago, General, I didn't know who I could trust. If the leak was coming from inside your command structure, reporting my suspicions through that same command structure could have gotten the operation moved up instead of canceled, or gotten me quietly reassigned somewhere I couldn't interfere, or worse. I made the decision that the safest thing I could do for those 6 men was to be in position to save them myself without telling anyone I was there, so that if something went wrong, at least somebody who knew the truth would be close enough to do something about it. You risked your own life on a hunch. I risked my life on 3 months of surveillance encrypted intercepts in a pattern of small operational failures that had been quietly costing American lives for longer than anyone realized. Claire said, an edge entering her voice for the first time. This isn't the first mission that's gone wrong lately, General. It's the 4th. 2 resupply convoys hit ambushes that shouldn't have been possible given the routes they were assigned. 1 reconnaissance element was compromised in a way that still hasn't been fully explained. And tonight, Ghost Team walked into a trap on a route you personally cleared 48 hours ago. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern, and patterns don't happen by accident. Caldwell felt his stomach twist. 4 incidents. He had reviewed the resupply convoy ambushes himself, had signed off on the after-action reports that attributed them to unfortunate but plausible enemy intelligence gathering. He had never once considered that they might be connected, that they might all trace back to the same rotten thread running through his command. Why didn't anyone catch this sooner? He said, more to himself than to her. Because it was designed not to be caught, Claire said. Small leaks. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a full counterintelligence sweep. Just enough information passed at just the right moments to make each incident look like an isolated failure instead of part of a larger pattern. Whoever's doing this is patient, General, and patient people are the hardest kind to catch because they never give you enough at once to see the whole picture. The tent flap moved and Briggs stepped back inside. Debriefs called. 15 minutes main briefing 10. Harmon, Doyle, and Petrov have all been notified. I told them it was standard procedure. Did any of them ask why? Caldwell said. Doyle asked if it was necessary given the late hour. Harmon didn't ask anything, just said he'd be there. Petrov didn't answer at all, just acknowledged the message. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Didn't answer at all. He's not always quick on the radio, Briggs said. Petrov keeps to himself. Good at his job, tasking the drones running the surveillance grids, but he's not exactly a conversationalist. Or he's someone who takes time to think before he answers a message he wasn't expecting, Claire said quietly, and the implication hung there in the tent unspoken but unmistakable. 15 minutes later, the briefing tent held 6 people standing around a folding table with a laminated map of the region spread across it, the same map that hours earlier had shown a route Caldwell believed to be clear. Major Harmon arrived first, a compact man in his 40s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, nodding briskly at Caldwell before his eyes landed on Claire and lingered there, a flicker of something crossing his face that could have been curiosity or could have been something else entirely. "General," Harmon said, "I wasn't aware we'd be joined by outside personnel for a standard debrief." "She's not outside personnel, Mo," Caldwell said flatly. "She's the reason 6 of our men are alive right now instead of dead on a mountainside. Sit down, Major." Harmon sat saying nothing further, but Caldwell noticed the way his eyes kept drifting toward Claire's collar, toward the pin that had changed everything the moment Caldwell himself had recognized it. Captain Doyle arrived next, younger, restless energy, barely contained beneath a professional exterior, immediately asking questions about casualty numbers and equipment losses that on any other night would have been entirely appropriate, but tonight felt almost performative to Caldwell's newly suspicious ear. He caught himself second-guessing every gesture, every question, every ordinary human reaction, and hated how quickly Claire's warning had rewired the way he was looking at his own people. Petrov arrived last, exactly on time, but somehow still giving the impression of a man who had taken his time getting there. He was quiet, as Briggs had said, offering only a short nod to the room before taking a seat at the far end of the table, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. Claire watched all 3 of them with an intensity that Caldwell recognized now as the same focus she must have used sighting down that M82 rifle from 2,000 yards out. Patient, precise, waiting for the smallest movement that would tell her exactly where to aim. "All right," Caldwell said, opening the debrief with a voice that gave nothing away. "Tonight's operation encountered significant complications. I want a full review of the route planning, the timing, and anyone who had visibility into the operational details before Ghost Team deployed. Colonel Briggs, walk us through the route clearance." Briggs began speaking, running through the standard operational review, and Caldwell watched Claire's eyes move methodically around the table, cataloging reactions, noting who leaned forward with genuine interest and who sat back with careful, practiced neutrality. When Briggs mentioned the specific coordinates of the ambush location, Caldwell saw Petrov's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, a reaction so small that Caldwell would never have caught it if Claire hadn't been staring directly at the man when it happened. She said nothing, but Caldwell saw her make a small mark in the notebook resting on her knee. "Warrant Officer Petrov," Claire said, breaking into the debrief, for the first time her voice mild, almost conversational. "You tasked the surveillance drones for tonight's operation, is that correct?" Petrov's eyes flicked toward her, and there was a half-second delay before he answered, a beat that felt longer than it should have. "That's correct. Can you walk me through the tasking schedule? What time did you position the primary drone over the route?" 2200, Petrov said. "Standard pre-operation surveillance window." "And the secondary drone," another half-second pause. "There wasn't a secondary drone tasked for tonight's operation." Claire looked up from her notebook, and something in her expression sharpened. "There's a maintenance log entry showing a second drone was pulled from the hangar at 21:30 tonight and returned at 23:15. If it wasn't tasked to the operation warrant officer, what was it doing?" The room went very still. Petrov's composure held, but Caldwell, watching closely, now saw a thin sheen of sweat appear at the man's hairline that had not been there 30 seconds earlier. "There must be an error in the log," Petrov said. "I only tasked 1 drone tonight." "There's no error," Claire said quietly. "I pulled that log myself 20 minutes ago while you were walking over here. The second drone was active for an hour and 45 minutes tonight on a flight path that took it directly over the ambush site, and it wasn't logged under this operation's tasking number. It was logged under a maintenance test designation, a designation that, as far as I can tell, doesn't correspond to any actual maintenance activity scheduled for tonight." Every eye in the tent turned to Petrov, and for the first time since he had walked in, the careful, quiet stillness he had carried into the room began to fracture. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier steadiness. Caldwell felt his pulse pick up, the old soldier's instinct for confrontation rising in his chest, but Claire held up a hand slightly, a silent request to let her continue, and Caldwell, against every instinct that had governed his career, held back and let her work. "Warrant Officer Petrov," she said, "I want to be very clear with you right now, because what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to determine a great deal about how the rest of tonight goes for you. 6 American service members nearly died 2 hours ago because someone with access to this operation's planning data gave the enemy advanced knowledge of their route. I have a drone log showing unauthorized surveillance activity over that exact route tasked by you under a false designation during the exact window when that information would have needed to be transmitted for the enemy to prepare their ambush in time. I am giving you one opportunity right now in front of your general to tell me the truth, because I promise you, the truth is going to come out either way. The only question is whether it comes out with you cooperating or whether it comes out after we've pulled every piece of your personal communication history for the last 3 months and found it ourselves. Petrov's hands folded in front of him on the table began to tremble slightly. I want a lawyer, he said quietly. You'll get one, Caldwell said, his voice hard now, all the earlier restraint gone. But before that happens, warrant officer, I want you to understand something. 6 men almost died tonight. Men with wives. Men with children waiting for them at home. If you had anything to do with that, I promise you a lawyer is going to be the least of your concerns. Petrov's eyes darted toward the tent flap, toward Harmon, toward Doyle, toward anyone who might offer some kind of escape from the weight, suddenly pressing down on him from every direction. And in that moment, something in his composure finally broke completely. It wasn't supposed to be an ambush, he said, his voice cracking. I swear to God, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Explain, Claire said, her voice suddenly gentle in a way that felt almost more dangerous than her earlier sharpness, the voice of someone who had learned exactly how to draw a confession out of a man teetering on the edge of collapse. I was just supposed to pass along troop movement patterns, Petrov said, the words spilling out now, faster, desperate. General patterns, nothing specific. That's what they told me. That's what I was paying off. That's what I was. God, I don't even know how to say this. Say it anyway, Caldwell said, his voice low and dangerous. Petrov's face crumpled. 6 months ago, I got a message. Somebody knew things about me. Things from before I enlisted. Debts, bad debts. The kind of people you don't walk away from without paying. And they said if I passed along certain information, general movement patterns, nothing that would get anyone killed. They said just enough to keep certain people out of certain areas, they'd forgive what I owed. I told myself it was nothing. Troop rotations, patrol schedules, things that change every week anyway. I told myself nobody was getting hurt. And tonight, Claire pressed, tonight they asked for something specific. Petrov said, his voice barely above a whisper, now tears standing in his eyes. A route, a timing window. I told them no. I told them I couldn't do that. That was different. That was a direct operation. But they said if I didn't, everything I'd already given them would come out and I'd lose everything anyway. My career, my family, all of it. So God help me, I gave them the drone footage window. I thought I told myself maybe it was just for positioning. Maybe nobody would actually be hurt. 6 men were almost killed, Caldwell said, his voice shaking now with barely restrained fury. 6 of my men were pinned down on a mountainside for over an hour because of what you gave away. I know, Petrov said, and he was openly crying now. The careful stillness completely gone, replaced by the wreckage of a man who had spent 6 months telling himself a lie he could no longer sustain. I know, and I am so sorry. I never meant for anyone to actually get hurt. I swear to you, I never meant. Who did you give it to? Claire cut in, her voice slicing through his collapse with surgical precision. Not the middleman, not the debt collector who first contacted you. Who did you actually communicate with? What name? What contact method? What proof do you have? Petrov wiped his face with the back of his hand, still shaking. I don't have a name. Just a phone number, a burner I only ever texted. I don't even know who's on the other end. Do you still have that number? It's on a phone hidden in my quarters, under the floorboard beneath my bunk. Caldwell was already moving toward the tent flap. Reyes, get a security detail to Petrov's quarters immediately, full search. Nobody touches anything until forensics documents it exactly as found. Copy, sir, Reyes said, already moving. Claire remained focused on Petrov, her expression unreadable. This number, have you used it recently, tonight even? Petrov hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. When Claire said, her voice suddenly sharp again. 40 minutes ago, Petrov whispered, they asked if the operation had if it had gone as planned. I told them I didn't know yet. Claire's eyes cut to Caldwell, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that this was not the end of the thread, but only the first knot in a much longer, more tangled line. If someone is checking in with you tonight, Claire said slowly, that means whoever's on the other end of that number isn't just a middleman collecting information for someone else far away. That means they're close. Close enough to be worried about the outcome of tonight's operation in real time. Close enough to want to know within the hour whether their plan succeeded or failed. You think they're on this base, Caldwell said quietly. I think, Claire said, that whoever set up tonight's ambush needed operational timing precise enough to coordinate enemy positioning with troop movement, and that kind of precision doesn't come from a middleman relaying secondhand information from a warrant officer running drone surveillance. It comes from someone who understood exactly what that data meant and exactly how to use it. Petrov gave away a piece of the puzzle, but he's not smart enough, and I mean no disrespect by that, to have built the whole picture himself. Petrov, still crying quietly at the table, didn't argue with the assessment. Then who? Harmon said, speaking for the first time in several minutes, his voice tight with an urgency that Caldwell couldn't quite read. Who's smart enough? Claire looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Harmon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That, she said, is what I intend to find out tonight, Major, and I'd like your help doing it since intelligence coordination falls under your section, and there are a few discrepancies in the last month's reporting I'd like your professional opinion on. Harmon's expression flickered, something quick and unreadable crossing his face before he nodded. Of course, whatever I can do. Caldwell watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease settling in his chest. Petrov's confession had answered one question, but it had opened three more in its place, each one darker than the last. If the leak went beyond a warrant officer drowning in gambling debt, if there was someone else on this base coordinating information with a precision that suggested real intelligence training, then the danger to his command was far from over. Get Petrov into custody, Caldwell said. Full lockdown on his communications, his quarters, everything he's touched in the last 6 months. And somebody get me eyes on every piece of communications traffic that's left this base in the last 90 minutes. If somebody checked in on tonight's operation, I want to know exactly who they contacted and how. As the security detail moved in to take Petrov into custody, the man looked up at Caldwell one last time, his face a wreck of guilt and fear. General, I never wanted anyone to die. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe anything, Caldwell said coldly. I have to find out how many more people like you are sitting in this command right now, smiling at me every day, while my men pay the price for it. Petrov said nothing more as he was led away, and the tent emptied slowly. Harmon and Doyle filing out with expressions that ranged from shaken to carefully composed, leaving Caldwell and Claire alone once more beneath the same flickering light bulb. You don't think it's over? Caldwell said. It wasn't a question. No, Claire said. Petrov gave away a piece of information because he was scared and desperate and being blackmailed. That's a real problem, and it's one we needed to find. But the person coordinating the actual ambush, the one who understood exactly how to turn a drone surveillance window into a kill box on that mountainside, that person is still out there, General, and they just found out their plan failed. What does that mean for us? Claire's expression turned grim, the calm mask slipping just enough for Caldwell to see the genuine concern underneath it. It means, she said, that someone on this base just realized they're about to be exposed, and people who are about to be exposed don't usually sit quietly and wait to get caught. They start covering their tracks. They start eliminating loose ends. And right now, General, the biggest loose end on this entire base isn't Petrov. Then who is it? Caldwell asked, though some cold, sinking part of him had already guessed the answer before she said it. Claire looked at him steadily, her hand resting on the stock of the rifle prop beside her. It's me, she said, and now it's you too. Outside the tent, the wind had picked up, again sharp and cold against the canvas walls, carrying with it the distant hum of the generator, and somewhere further out past the wire, a silence that felt far too deliberate to be natural. Caldwell felt the hair on the back of his neck rise, some old instinct honed over 28 years of combat, telling him that the danger tonight had not passed with Ghost Team's safe landing. It had simply changed shape, moved closer, and was now standing somewhere just beyond the light, waiting for its next opportunity. Whatever's coming, Caldwell said quietly, more to himself than to her, we'd better be ready for it. Claire picked up her rifle and rose to her feet, her earlier exhaustion replaced by something sharper. More alert, the calm of a hunter who understood the hunted had just become aware they were being watched. "General," she said, "I don't think we have to wait long to find out." The words had barely left Claire's mouth when the lights inside the tent flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the entire command post into a darkness so sudden and so total that for a full second, nobody moved at all. "Generator," Caldwell said, more out of instinct than certainty, already reaching for the radio clipped to his vest. "Reyes, talk to me. What just happened?" Silence answered him. Not static, not the hiss of an open channel. Nothing at all, the kind of dead quiet that told him the radio itself had lost power, along with everything else. "That's not the generator," Claire said, her voice low and controlled in the darkness beside him, and Caldwell heard the unmistakable click of a rifle bolt being checked by feel. "A generator failure doesn't kill hardline comms at the same second it kills the lights. Somebody just took down this base's power grid and its communications array in the same breath. That takes coordination. That takes someone who knows exactly where the junction points are." Caldwell's blood turned to ice water in his veins. "Petrov." "Exactly," Claire said. "Whoever's covering their tracks just found out their asset got caught, and they're not going to let him sit in a holding cell until morning, giving up names." Caldwell was already moving, shoving through the tent flap into a night that had gone from merely dark to something closer to total blindness. The base's perimeter lighting extinguished the glow from the mess tent, and the barracks gone nothing left but the faint wash of starlight and the distant flicker of emergency chem lights that a few quick-thinking soldiers were already cracking and holding aloft. "Detention block!" Caldwell barked at the first soldier he passed, a young corporal who looked more startled than useful in the sudden dark. "Where is it from here?" 200 meters east, sir," past the motor pool. Caldwell didn't wait for him to finish. He broke into a run, and beside him, Claire matched his pace effortlessly, her rifle held low and ready across her body, moving with the kind of fluid economy that told Caldwell she had done this exact thing, running toward danger in pitch darkness, more times than he wanted to know about. They were 40 meters out when the first gunshot cracked through the night, not the ragged overlapping chaos of an ambush. A single shot, controlled, deliberate, the kind of shot fired by someone who wasn't spraying rounds out of panic but placing them exactly where they needed to go. "That's inside the wire," Claire said, her voice sharpening. "That's not an external attack, General. That's someone already on this base." They rounded the corner of the motor pool and Caldwell's chest seized. Two soldiers, the detention block guards, were down on the ground, one clutching his shoulder and screaming, the other lying disturbingly still. The reinforced door to the holding cell hung open, torn nearly off its top hinge, and standing just inside the frame, silhouetted against the faint chem-light glow, was a figure Caldwell recognized even in shadow. Sergeant First Class Whitfield, Communications Security, one of the 7 names on Claire's list. "Whitfield," Caldwell roared, "stand down right now." Whitfield didn't stand down. He didn't even turn around. He raised a pistol toward the crumpled shape on the cell floor that Caldwell realized with a horror that dropped through his stomach like a stone was Petrov alive, but bound, terrified, scrambling backward against the far wall with nowhere left to go. Claire moved before Caldwell's brain had even finished processing the threat. She dropped to one knee, brought the M82 up in a motion so fast and so smooth it barely looked human, and Caldwell heard her voice calm as ice cut through the chaos. "Whitfield, drop the weapon. This is your only warning." Whitfield spun, and in the half-second before he fired, Caldwell saw his face clearly for the first time, saw not the calculated calm of a professional, but the wild, cornered panic of a man who understood exactly how badly his night had already gone and had decided there was nothing left to lose. The shot went wide, cracking into the dirt inches from Claire's position, and her return shot did not. The sound of the M82 in that confined space was deafening, a concussive boom that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Caldwell's boots. And Whitfield went down hard, the pistol skittering from his hand into the darkness. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Petrov's ragged, terrified breathing, echoing out of the cell, and the distant shouts of soldiers converging on the commotion from every direction of the base. "Medic!" Caldwell bellowed. "I need a medic at the detention block now." Claire was already moving, closing the distance to Whitfield's crumpled body. With the same controlled efficiency she brought to everything, checking for a pulse for consciousness, for any sign that the man might still be able to talk. "He's alive," she said. "Barely. Shoulder and hip, I dropped him fast so he couldn't get a second shot off, but he needs surgery in the next 20 minutes or he's not going to make it." Caldwell knelt beside the cell, checking on Petrov, who was shaking so violently he could barely form words. "He came in the dark," Petrov managed. "The lights went out, and then he was just there. He said I talked too much. He said I was supposed to be quiet." "Who sent him?" Claire said sharply, kneeling now beside Petrov, her voice urgent. "Did he say who sent him?" Petrov shook his head desperately. No, he didn't say a name. He just said, I'd already ruined everything, and now somebody had to clean it up. Medics arrived in a chaotic rush of flashlight beams and shouted vitals, working over Whitfield's still form with the kind of practiced urgency that spoke of years spent patching up soldiers on far worse nights than this one. Caldwell stood back, watching his mind racing through implications that were coming faster than he could process them. "He tried to kill a man in custody," Caldwell said slowly, "which means Whitfield wasn't the one giving orders. He was the one taking them." "Correct," Claire said, rising to her feet, her eyes scanning the darkness around them with an intensity that told Caldwell she did not yet believe the danger had passed. Petrov was compromised through blackmail, a scared man drowning in debt who made one terrible decision and then couldn't find his way out of it. But Whitfield just tried to murder a bound prisoner in cold blood the second he learned the operation had failed. That's not the behavior of a debtor. That's the behavior of someone loyal to whoever's actually running this. Loyal how? Money ideology. "I don't know yet," Claire said, "but whoever gives Whitfield his orders trusted him enough to send him to silence a witness the second things went wrong tonight, which means Whitfield knows exactly who that person is. And right now, he's the only lead we have left, because if he doesn't survive surgery, then the trail dies with him," Caldwell finished grimly. Behind them, the power flickered back to life without warning, floodlights snapping on across the base in a sudden wash of brightness that made everyone flinch and shield their eyes. Somewhere near the generator shed, Caldwell heard shouting, and a moment later, Reyes came sprinting toward them, breathless, her face pale in the harsh light. "Sir," she gasped, "we found the cause of the outage. Somebody cut the primary feed line manually right at the junction box behind the motor pool. That's not something you do by accident, and it's not something you do without knowing exactly where that junction box is located. That information isn't on any public schematic. It's restricted to facilities, personnel, and command staff." "Which narrows the list again," Claire said. "Not by much," Reyes admitted. "At least a dozen people would have access to those schematics." Caldwell rubbed a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the night finally beginning to catch up with him, layering itself on top of the fear and fury and disbelief that had been building since the moment Ghost Team's distress call first came through. "This is spiraling," he said quietly. "One traitor I could handle. This feels like something bigger." "It is bigger," Claire said, and there was no comfort in her voice, only grim honesty. "General, I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear it because I think you've been thinking about tonight as an isolated crisis, something that started and will end within these next few hours. It isn't. This has been building for months. Petrov's been compromised for 6 months. The pattern of failed operations goes back at least that far. Whoever orchestrated tonight didn't improvise a plan in a panic. They executed something they'd been setting up for a long time, and the fact that they had someone like Whitfield ready to move the instant things went sideways tells me this isn't a lone actor working alone in the shadows. This is a network." The word hung in the cold night air between them, heavier than anything that had been said yet. "A network," Caldwell repeated, "on my base." "Possibly reaching beyond your base," Claire said. "Petrov mentioned a debt collector who turned into something more organized. Whitfield acted with the discipline of someone who's been given real operational training, not just a criminal looking for a payday. That kind of coordination, silencing witnesses, cutting comms at exactly the right moment, that's not amateur work. Somebody planned contingencies for exactly this scenario, which means somebody expected they might get caught eventually and prepared for it." Caldwell looked toward the medic still working over Whitfield's unconscious form, loading him now onto a stretcher, an IV line already running into his arm as they rushed him toward the base's medical tent. "If he dies before he talks, then we go back to the other 6 names, Claire said. "And we do it fast because whoever's running this just watched their first attempt to cover their tracks fail. They are not going to sit still and wait for us to catch up. People who feel cornered make desperate decisions. General and desperate decisions are dangerous for everyone standing near them. As if summoned by her own words, a young private came running across the compound, nearly stumbling in his haste, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "General Caldwell." "Sir, you need to come to the intelligence tent right away." "What is it, son?" Caldwell said, already moving toward him. "It's Major Harmon, sir. He's not there. His workstation's still logged in, his coffee's still warm, but he's gone, and, sir, there are files pulled up on his screen that I don't think you're supposed to see them, but I think you need to." Caldwell exchanged a look with Claire, and without a word they broke into a run once more, the private leading the way through the chaos of a base still reeling from the power outage, soldiers moving in confused clusters trying to re-establish order, radios crackling back to life one by one as the communications array slowly rebooted. The intelligence tent, when they reached it, was empty except for the soft blue glow of a monitor left running exactly as the private had described. Harmon's chair sat pushed back from the desk at an angle that suggested he had left in a hurry, not a leisurely departure, but something closer to a rush. Caldwell leaned over the desk and stared at the screen, and what he saw there made his stomach drop through the floor. Files, dozens of them, operational orders, personnel records, surveillance logs, all of it neatly organized into folders that should never have existed on an intelligence officer's personal workstation. All of it time-stamped and accessed repeatedly over the past several months. "He's been building a case," Claire said slowly, leaning over Caldwell's shoulder, her eyes scanning the file names rapidly. "Or he's been building something else entirely." "What do you mean?" Claire clicked open one of the folders, and Caldwell watched a spreadsheet fill the screen. Rows of dates, coordinates, personnel names, all cross-referenced against something labeled only as payment schedule. The blood drained from Caldwell's face. "That's not a case file," he said hoarsely. "That's a ledger." "General," Claire said, her voice tight, "I don't think Major Harmon has been investigating this network. I think Major Harmon has been running it." The words landed like a physical blow, and Caldwell felt the ground shift beneath him for what felt like the 10th time that night. Harmon, a man he had worked alongside for over a year, a man he had trusted with the most sensitive intelligence. Assessments, his command produced a man who sat in briefings twice a week offering calm, measured analysis that Caldwell had relied on to make life and death decisions. "This can't be right," Caldwell said, even as his eyes scanned the evidence in front of him and found nothing to contradict it. "General," Reyes said suddenly from the tent entrance, breathless from having caught up to them, "we just got a hit on base security footage. Major Harmon was seen leaving through the west checkpoint 11 minutes ago. He told the gate guard he had an urgent off-base meeting authorized by your office." "I authorized no such thing," Caldwell said, his voice rising with fury. "The guard didn't question it, sir. Harmon's clearance level meant he didn't need to explain himself, and the guard had no reason to think otherwise, given the chaos with the power outage." Claire was already moving, striding out of the tent with a speed and purpose that told Caldwell she had no intention of letting this trail go cold the way Petrov's original mission had nearly gone cold weeks earlier. "If Harmon's running, that confirms everything," she said. "He knew Petrov got caught. He knew Whitfield's attempt to silence him failed. And now he's making a run for it before we can connect the rest of the dots, which means somewhere out there, he's got an exit plan. And exit plans like that don't happen without outside support." "West checkpoint leads to the highway corridor," Caldwell said, matching her pace as they moved toward the vehicle staging area. "If he's got a vehicle waiting, he could be off base and into the local road network within minutes." "Then we need air support tracking that checkpoint's exit routes right now," Claire said. "General, I need you to authorize whatever assets you have. This is the piece that makes sense of everything. If we lose Harmon tonight, we lose the only person who can tell us exactly how deep this goes and who else is involved." Caldwell was already keying his radio, which had crackled back to life sometime in the last several minutes as the base's systems slowly restored themselves. "This is Caldwell. I need immediate drone surveillance on the west checkpoint exit corridor. All available assets. Priority 1. We have a fleeing suspect in a high-value security breach, and I want him found. Copy, General, redirecting assets now." They reached the vehicle staging area to find a Humvee already idling, one of the base's quick reaction force teams, having been alerted by Reyes moments earlier. Weapons and gear loaded, engines running ready to move the moment they had a direction to move in. "With me." Caldwell said, climbing into the vehicle, and Claire followed without hesitation, settling into the seat beside him with her rifle across her knees, her expression a mask of focused determination that made the young soldiers around her instinctively straighten their own posture, as though her calm had a way of steadying everyone in its orbit. The Humvee tore out through the base's main gate moments later, following the West Checkpoint Road into darkness, headlights cutting twin beams through a night that felt to Caldwell like it had lasted 3 lifetimes already and showed no sign of ending. "Command, this is Overwatch 1, a voice crackled through the radio moments later, the drone operators picking up the pursuit. "We have a visual on a single vehicle traveling at high speed, approximately 4 kilometers ahead of your position, matching the description of the sedan that departed the West Checkpoint." "That's him," Caldwell said, gripping the radio. "Do not lose that vehicle." "Copy, sir. We have solid tracking vehicle appears to be heading toward the old logistics road that connects to Route 12. Claire's eyes narrowed. That road dead ends at an abandoned airstrip the coalition used years ago before the base consolidated operations. If he's heading there, somebody's meeting him. That's not a random escape route, General. That's a planned extraction point. "How do you know that?" "Because I spent 3 months studying every inch of terrain within 50 kilometers of this base, while I was trying to figure out how the enemy kept anticipating our movements," Claire said grimly. "That airstrip is remote. It's got no security presence, and it's got just enough clear ground for a small aircraft to land and take off unnoticed if you know what you're doing. If Harmon's got an exfiltration plan, that's exactly where I'd expect it to be." Caldwell felt a fresh surge of urgency tighten his chest. "Overwatch 1, can you confirm any additional activity near that airstrip location? Any aircraft, any additional vehicles?" A pause longer than Caldwell wanted, filled with the low hum of the Humvee's engine and the anxious silence of every soldier in that vehicle straining to hear the answer. "Command, be advised, we're picking up a small fixed-wing aircraft on approach to that airstrip. No transponder signal, no flight plan on record. ETA to touchdown in approximately 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Caldwell repeated, doing the math in his head and not liking the answer it gave him. "How far out are we?" The driver, a young sergeant gripping the wheel with white-knuckled focus, didn't wait to be asked twice. "Sir, at this speed, we're looking at 9, maybe 10 minutes to that airstrip." "That's not fast enough," Claire said. "It's what we've got," Caldwell said grimly. "Push it." The Humvee surged forward, engine roaring, as the sergeant pressed the accelerator to its limit along a road that had clearly not been maintained in years, the vehicle jolting violently over ruts and potholes that sent everyone inside slamming against their harnesses. "Command, this is Overwatch 1. Aircraft has touched down. Repeat. Aircraft is on the ground at the airstrip, and we have visual confirmation of your suspect vehicle approaching the aircraft's position, ETA, to contact approximately 90 seconds. "He's going to make it," Caldwell said through gritted teeth. "He's going to get on that plane before we're anywhere close." Claire was already moving, unbuckling her harness, checking the action on her rifle with the calm, deliberate focus that Caldwell had come to recognize as the calm before something extraordinary happened. "General, how far out is that airstrip from our position right now in a straight line, not by road?" "Maybe 800 meters through that tree line," Caldwell said, glancing at the terrain flashing past the window. "Why?" "Because I'm not getting on that plane's timeline," Claire said. And before Caldwell could fully process what she was saying, she had the door open, wind and dust roaring into the vehicle's cabin. "What are you doing?" Caldwell shouted over the noise. "What I do best," Claire said, and then she was gone, dropping from the moving Humvee into a controlled roll that would have broken bones in someone less trained, coming up already running toward the tree line, with her rifle in hand, moving with a speed and purpose that left Caldwell staring after her in stunned disbelief. "Stop the vehicle!" Caldwell bellowed at the driver, and the Humvee skidded to a halt in a spray of gravel and dust. "Sir, she's going in alone," Reyes shouted from the back seat. "I know that, Lieutenant," Caldwell snapped, already climbing out, rifle in hand. "Get this vehicle to that airstrip by road now. I'm not letting her do this by herself." He took off, running through the tree-lined branches, tearing at his uniform, his lungs burning with an intensity he hadn't felt since he was a much younger man, on much younger legs. But he did not slow down, driven by an urgency that had nothing to do with rank or duty, and everything to do with the simple, overwhelming need to not lose the one person who had already saved his men once tonight. He burst out of the tree line just in time to see the small aircraft's propellers spinning up Harmon, sprinting across the open ground toward the open cabin door. And for one heart-stopping second, Caldwell was certain they were about to watch him disappear entirely. The truth about the network, the leak, everything vanishing into the night sky along with him. Then a single shot rang out, impossibly precise, even at this distance, and Caldwell watched the aircraft's front tire burst in a spray of rubber and dust. The plane lurching hard to one side, its pilot fighting frantically to keep it from flipping entirely as its momentum carried it into an uncontrolled skid across the dirt strip. Harmon, caught between the disabled aircraft and the open ground, froze in place, clearly torn between running for the crippled plane or fleeing back the way he'd come. Major Harmon, Claire's voice rang out clear and commanding across the open ground, and Caldwell, catching up, now saw her standing at the edge of the tree line, rifle raised, utterly still. "It's over. Put your hands where I can see them." For a moment, Harmon didn't move, his silhouette frozen against the backdrop of the disabled aircraft, its pilot already scrambling out of the cockpit with his hands raised clearly, having no intention of dying for a paycheck. "You don't understand," Harmon called out, his voice carrying across the distance, edged with something between desperation and defiance. "You have no idea what you're stepping into. This goes so much higher than you think, higher than this base, higher than this command. And if you pull that trigger tonight, you're not stopping anything, you're just delaying the inevitable. Then you're going to tell us everything," Caldwell said, stepping up beside Claire, his own weapon raised now as well. "Because right now, Major, the only thing standing between you and a bullet is how cooperative you're willing to be in the next 30 seconds. Harmon's shoulders sagged, the fight visibly draining out of him, as he looked between the two of them, the disabled plane and the growing rumble of the approaching Humvee's headlights cutting through the darkness behind them. "All right," he said, finally raising his hand slowly. "All right, but General, when I tell you who's really behind this, I promise you, you are not going to like the answer, and you are especially not going to like how close to home it hits." Caldwell felt his stomach clench, some part of him already dreading the name that was about to leave Harmon's mouth, already bracing for a betrayal deeper and more personal than anything he had confronted so far tonight. "Start talking," Caldwell said. Harmon opened his mouth to answer, and in that exact instant, a second vehicle's headlights swept across the open ground from the far side of the airstrip, an engine roaring to life somewhere in the darkness beyond the disabled aircraft tires, screaming against gravel as it accelerated hard, not toward them, but away, fleeing into the night with a speed that told Caldwell someone else had been waiting out there all along, someone who had just realized their carefully constructed operation was collapsing in real time. "Someone else was here," Claire said sharply, already turning toward the sound. Harmon wasn't running alone. Harmon's face went pale as he watched the taillights disappear into the darkness, and for the first time all night, something that looked genuinely like fear crossed his features. "That's not possible," he whispered. "They said they'd never come themselves. They said I'd never see them." "Who?" Caldwell demanded, grabbing Harmon by the collar of his uniform, all restraint gone now. "Who was in that vehicle?" Harmon's eyes, wide and hollow in the darkness, finally met Caldwell's, and what he said next would change everything Caldwell thought he understood about the people he trusted most. "General," Harmon said, his voice barely a whisper, "I think that was Colonel Briggs." The words hit Caldwell like a physical blow, and for a moment he could not make his mouth work. Colonel Briggs, the man who had stood beside him for 3 years. The man who had wept, actually wept, when he learned his own men had nearly died tonight. The man whose brother's name was etched on a folded flag somewhere in a closet back in Virginia. A man who had told Caldwell more than once that the uniform was the only thing he had left of that brother. The only thing worth protecting. "You're lying," Caldwell said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, more plea than accusation. "Briggs has been with me since Fallujah. He carried a man out of a burning Humvee with his own hands. He does not do this." Harmon's eyes, still wide with the shock of watching his supposed lifeline vanish into the dark, did not waver. "I didn't say I was certain, General. I said I think it was him. I never saw a face. But the vehicle, the timing, the fact that whoever was waiting out here knew exactly when to leave, the second things fell apart that took someone with access to real-time operational updates. Someone who would have known the moment Whitfield failed and the moment I ran. That's not a low-level asset. That's someone close to the center of everything happening on this base tonight." Claire had already turned, scanning the darkness where the taillights disappeared. her jaw tight, her mind clearly working through the same brutal calculus Caldwell was fighting against with everything he had. "General," she said quietly, "I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it without letting your history with the man cloud your judgment, because right now that judgment is the only thing standing between us and losing this entire investigation." "Say it," Caldwell said, though every part of him braced against whatever was coming. "Briggs called the debrief tonight," Claire said. "He's the one who told Harmon, Doyle, and Petrov to report to that tent, which means Briggs knew in real time exactly when Petrov was being questioned. He knew when Petrov confessed. If he's the one coordinating this network that gave him a direct line to understand the operation was collapsing before either of us did anything about it. He also organized the security detail that arrested Petrov," Caldwell said slowly, feeling sick as the pieces started aligning themselves against his will. "He would have known exactly where Petrov was being held. And exactly when the guards would be most vulnerable," Claire finished. "General, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I know what it means to hear this about someone you trust. I told you already, betrayal doesn't announce itself. It shakes your hand at the promotion ceremony." Caldwell stood there in the darkness, the disabled aircraft ticking as its engine cooled somewhere behind him. Harmon slumped and handcuffed now under the watch of the arriving quick reaction team, and felt something in his chest crack open, a grief he had not expected to feel tonight. Grief for a friendship he was not yet ready to declare dead. "We don't know anything for certain," he said more to himself than to her. "Harmon saw a vehicle, that's not proof." "You're right," Claire said, and there was something almost gentle in the way she said it. An acknowledgement of how much this was costing him, even as she refused to let him retreat from the truth. "It's not proof, which means we get proof, right now, tonight, before he has time to build a story that makes all of this go away." Reyes came jogging up from the Humvee, breathless, her flashlight beam cutting across Harmon's slumped form, before settling on Caldwell's face, reading the devastation there even in the dark. "Sir, we've got Harmon secured, the pilot's in custody, and Overwatch says the fleeing vehicle just crossed onto the main highway heading east, moving fast. Should we pursue?" Caldwell hesitated, and in that hesitation, Claire stepped forward, taking the decision out of his hands with the same calm authority she had carried since the moment she'd walked into that command tent hours earlier. "No pursuit," she said. "If that was Briggs, and if he realizes we're chasing him, he disappears, and everything he knows disappears with him. We need him to believe he got away clean. We need him to think nobody saw that vehicle at all." "That's a risk," Caldwell said. "If he's guilty and he thinks he's in the clear, God knows what he does next." "It's a calculated risk," Claire said, "but it's better than the alternative. If we spook him now, we lose any chance of catching him in the act of covering his tracks, and covering tracks always leaves evidence. Panic makes people careless, Mr. General. I need him panicking quietly, not panicking in a way that tips him off that we're already on to him." Caldwell looked at Harmon, still slumped against the side of the disabled aircraft. Tears now openly running down his face, the man who moments ago had spoken with a strange, defiant confidence about how far this went, now looking utterly hollowed out. "Major," Caldwell said, crouching down to meet his eyes, his voice low and dangerous. "You said this goes higher than the base, higher than command. What did you mean by that?" Harmon's jaw worked silently for a moment before the words finally came. "I mean, General, that the money I was taking, the information I was passing, it wasn't going to some random contact overseas. It was going somewhere organized, structured. Whoever's running this isn't just profiting off compromised soldiers, they're profiting off information that's worth a great deal more than troop movements. Contracts, procurement data, supply chain vulnerabilities. Things that let people very far away from this valley make a great deal of money while soldiers like the ones almost killed tonight pay the price for it." "Names," Caldwell said. "Give me names." "I never got names," Harmon said. "That was the whole point. Everything was compartmentalized. I only ever dealt with one contact, someone who called themselves a coordinator. No name, no face, just secure messages and cash drops. I don't know who's above them. I swear to you, I don't know." Claire crouched down beside Caldwell, her eyes narrowing at Harmon with an intensity that made even Caldwell, standing beside her, feel the weight of it. "This coordinator, did they ever meet you in person?" Harmon shook his head. "Never. Every contact was remote, except—" He stopped himself, something flickering across his face. "Except what?" Claire pressed. "Except once," Harmon said slowly, About 4 months ago, I was told to leave a data drop at a specific location off base, a supply depot about 6 kilometers south near the old grain silos. I wasn't supposed to see who picked it up, but I was running late, and when I got there was a vehicle already leaving. Same model as the one that just drove off tonight. Same base decal on the windshield. Caldwell felt his stomach drop through the floor of the world. You're telling me the person who picked up that data drop was driving a vehicle registered to this base? Yes, Harmon whispered. How many vehicles on this entire base match that description? Caldwell asked, turning to Reyes. Reyes was already pulling up the motor pool registry on the small tablet clipped to her vest, her fingers moving fast across the screen despite the tremor Caldwell could see in her hands. Sir, that model dark green sedan command staff allocation, there are only 3 vehicles on base matching that description. One is assigned to logistics, one is a spare motor pool vehicle, and one, she looked up, her face pale in the dim light, one is assigned directly to Colonel Briggs. The confirmation landed in the silence like a gunshot, and Caldwell felt the last thread of doubt he had been clinging to, the last hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Finally snapped. Get me eyes on that vehicle, Caldwell said, his voice hollow. Right now, I want to know exactly where it is. Sir, Reyes said, already keying her radio. Overwatch, this is command. Need immediate tracking on vehicle designation Sierra 4, last known heading east on the main highway corridor. The radio crackled for a long moment before the response came through, and when it did, Caldwell felt something in him go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the night air. Command, this is Overwatch. Be advised we've lost visual on that vehicle. It went off the main highway approximately 2 minutes ago onto an unmarked service road, and we don't have thermal coverage on that grid. We're working to reacquire. Find it, Caldwell said, his voice carrying a command that left no room for negotiation. Find that vehicle, and God help me. If that's Briggs, I want to know where he's going, and I want to know before he gets there. While Reyes worked the radio coordinating with the drone operators, Claire pulled Caldwell a few steps away from Harmon, her voice dropping low enough that only he could hear it. General, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer because it changes how we move forward from here. Ask, Caldwell said, bracing himself. Does Briggs know about me? Not just that I exist, but what unit I actually come from, what capabilities I actually have. Caldwell thought back over the last several hours, over every moment Briggs had been present in that tent, and felt a fresh wave of dread wash over him. He was there when you told us about the encrypted intercept. He was there when you laid out the 7 names. He heard everything, Claire. Every single piece of what you know, he knows too. Claire's expression tightened, and for the first time since Caldwell had met her, he saw something that looked almost like real worry cross her features. Then he knows exactly how close we are. He knows the drone log evidence that broke Petrov. He knows Whitfield's dead or dying and can't talk. And he knows that I am the single greatest threat to whatever's left of his operation, because I'm the only one on this base with both the skill and the mandate to actually stop it. You think he's coming for you, Caldwell said, the words feeling strange and terrible in his mouth. I think, Claire said slowly, that a man who has spent months, maybe years, building something this sophisticated does not simply run into the night and disappear the second he's exposed. Men like that plan contingencies. And if his contingency plan includes eliminating the one person capable of unraveling everything he's built, then, General, we need to get back to that base right now, because I have a very bad feeling that vehicle isn't fleeing at all. Then what is it doing? Claire's eyes met his, hard and certain, and the answer she gave sent ice down Caldwell's spine. I think it's circling back. The words had barely left her mouth when Reyes's radio crackled to life, again her voice sharp with alarm. Sir, Overwatch has reacquired the vehicle. It's turning around. It's heading back toward the base, ETA, to the main gate, approximately 11 minutes. Get every available unit to secure the command tent in the medical facility. Caldwell barked, already moving toward the Humvee at a dead run, Claire matching his pace stride for stride. If Briggs is coming back, he's not coming back to surrender. He's coming back to finish what Whitfield started, Claire said grimly, swinging herself into the Humvee. Whitfield failed to silence Petrov. Harmon's in custody. If I'm right about Briggs, he's not running from this anymore. He's making one last move to control the damage, and that means somebody else on this base is still in danger. Who? Caldwell demanded, though even as he asked, a horrible realization was already forming in his mind. Think about it, General. Claire said, her voice tight as the Humvee lurched into motion, tires spinning against loose gravel before finding purchase and surging forward into the dark. Who else knows what we know? Who else was in that tent when I laid out everything? Lieutenant Reyes has been at your side the entire night. If Briggs is trying to contain this before it spreads any further, she's a target too. Reyes, sitting across from them in the back of the speeding Humvee, went visibly pale. Me? You relayed every piece of intelligence tonight, Claire said. You know the names, the timeline, the evidence against Petrov and Harmon. If I'm Briggs and I'm trying to make one last desperate move to protect myself, eliminating the communications officer who's been documenting everything would be exactly the kind of loose end I'd want tied off. Caldwell gripped the radio hard enough that his knuckles went white. All units, this is General Caldwell. I want a full security detail on Lieutenant Reyes immediately, and I want the detention block, the medical tent, and the command post locked down with armed personnel who report directly to me and no one else, effective immediately. Nobody moves in or out without my direct authorization. Is that understood? Copy, General. Multiple voices answered over the radio in quick succession. The base's emergency response finally catching up to the scale of what was actually unfolding within its walls. The Humvee tore back toward the base at a speed that had every soldier inside gripping whatever handhold they could find, the driver navigating the ruined logistics road with a grim, focused determination that matched the urgency radiating off everyone in the vehicle. Caldwell stared out into the darkness, rushing past the window, his mind cycling relentlessly through years of memories with Briggs, searching them now for cracks he had never noticed, warning signs he had somehow missed in 3 years of close partnership. I promoted him, Caldwell said quietly, almost to himself. I recommended him for this post personally. If this is true, if he's really behind all of it, that's on me too. General. Claire said, her voice softer now, some of the sharpness fading into something more human. You didn't do this. A man who chooses to betray his uniform makes that choice himself. You can't carry guilt for trusting someone who was good enough at lying to fool an entire command staff for years. I know that doesn't make it hurt less, but it's the truth, and eventually when this is over, you're going to need to hold on to that truth instead of the guilt, because the guilt will eat you alive if you let it. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment, surprised by the sudden warmth beneath her usual controlled precision, and found himself, despite everything, grateful for it. You've done this before, he said. Watch someone you trusted turn out to be exactly what you feared. More than once, Claire said quietly. It doesn't get easier. You just get better at surviving it. The base's perimeter lights came into view ahead, and the Humvee slowed as it approached the main gate, guards visibly tense weapons at low ready, scanning every vehicle and every shadow with an alertness that told Caldwell his orders had been heard and taken seriously. They passed through the checkpoint, and Caldwell was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped moving toward the command tent with Claire close behind him. Status, he barked at the first soldier he encountered. Sir, command post is secure. Lieutenant Reyes has a 2-man detail with her at all times per your orders. Medical tent is locked down. Whitfield's still in surgery condition, critical but stable for now. In the main gate, any sign of the vehicle Overwatch was tracking. Negative, sir. We lost visual again about 3 minutes ago when it entered the tree line north of the perimeter road. Claire's expression darkened. He's not coming through the front gate. He knows we'd be watching for that. Then how does he get onto this base? Caldwell demanded. The same way anyone with 3 years of command experience here would, Claire said grimly. He knows every gap in your perimeter security better than the men actually guarding it. If I were him and I needed to get inside quietly, I'd use the drainage culvert that runs under the eastern fence line, the one that floods during monsoon season and gets left unmonitored the rest of the year, because nobody thinks anyone's small enough or desperate enough to use it. Caldwell stared at her. How do you know about that culvert? Because I studied every inch of this base's security perimeter 3 days ago when I first suspected something was wrong here, Claire said. General, I need a team on that culvert right now, and I need it quiet. If he's already inside the wire, the last thing we want is him hearing us coming. Caldwell relayed the order in a low, urgent voice, and within minutes a small team was moving toward the eastern fence line under cover of darkness. Weapons ready, moving with the practiced silence of soldiers who understood exactly how much was riding on getting this right. Caldwell and Claire moved toward the command tent themselves. Senses heightened, every shadow suddenly feeling like it might hold something dangerous. They found Reyes inside, flanked by her 2 guards, her face tight with barely controlled fear, but her hands steady on the radio equipment in front of her, still doing her job, even with the knowledge that she might be a target. Anything, Caldwell asked. Nothing yet, sir, Reyes said. Whitfield's surgeon says he might make it through the night, but he won't be conscious for hours even if he survives. And Harmon's being processed into custody now, still talking, still giving us pieces, but nothing that tells us where Briggs might be heading if he's not coming for me directly. He's not necessarily coming for you specifically, Claire said, thinking aloud, pacing a slow line across the tent, her mind visibly working through every possible angle. He might be coming for something else. Evidence. If there's a physical trail somewhere on this base connecting him to the network, something he hasn't had time to destroy yet, that might be exactly what he's risking everything to retrieve. His office, Caldwell said suddenly. As executive officer, he has access to a secure file room most people on this base don't even know exists. Records going back years, personnel histories, classified assessments. If there's something in there he needs to destroy. Claire was already moving. Show me. They moved fast through the base, Caldwell leading the way toward a nondescript building near the command center. The kind of structure that looked from the outside entirely unremarkable, exactly the way secure facilities were designed to look. As they approached, Caldwell's chest tightened at the sight of the door standing slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out into the darkness where there should have been none. He's here, Claire whispered, already raising her rifle, her voice dropping to nearly nothing. General, stay behind me. For once, Caldwell did not argue some primal instinct telling him that whatever was about to happen in the next few minutes required exactly the kind of skill he did not possess, the kind that had kept 6 men alive on a mountainside hours on earlier, and that had dropped Whitfield with a single decisive shot in the chaos of the detention block. Claire moved to the door with slow, deliberate steps, her weapon raised, her breathing controlled, and even despite the danger, and Caldwell watched her pause just outside the threshold, listening, reading the silence beyond that door, with a focus that seemed to extend every one of her senses to their absolute limit. Then in one fluid motion, she pushed the door open and swept inside, and Caldwell, hard hammering against his ribs, followed close behind her, praying he was not about to watch the woman who had already saved his men once tonight walk into a trap that would cost her everything. Inside the secure file room stood in disarray drawers, pulled open papers scattered across the floor, a small shredder in the corner, still running its motor, whining as it chewed through the last remnants of whatever documents had been fed into it moments before. And standing at the far end of the room, a lighter held to a stack of files in a metal trash can, flames already beginning to catch and climb, was Colonel Briggs. He turned at the sound of the door, and for a moment the man Caldwell had known for 3 years looked back at him, and Caldwell searched that familiar face desperately for some sign that this was all a mistake, some explanation that would make sense of everything and let him keep the friendship he had believed in for so long. He found nothing but grim, exhausted resignation. "Don't," Claire said, her weapon trained steady on him, her voice carrying a warning that left no room for misunderstanding. "Step away from the fire, Colonel. Right now." Briggs looked at the flames climbing higher in the trash can, then back at Caldwell, and something in his expression shifted the mask, finally completely falling away to reveal the exhaustion of a man who had been carrying an impossible weight for far longer than anyone around him had ever suspected. "Nathan," he said quietly, using Caldwell's first name for what felt like the first time in years, his voice raw with something that sounded almost like relief at finally being caught. "I never wanted it to go this far. You have to believe that." "Then tell me why it did," Caldwell said, his voice breaking despite every effort to hold it steady. "Tell me why, after everything, after Fallujah, after your brother, after 3 years of standing beside me, you did this." Briggs's eyes glistened in the firelight, and when he finally answered, his voice cracked under the weight of a truth he had clearly been suffocating beneath for far too long. "Because Nathan," he said, "they didn't just have something on me. They have something on you too. And by the time you understand what that means, I'm afraid it's already going to be too late to stop what's coming next." "What does that mean?" Caldwell said, his voice dropping to something dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that came right before a man lost control of himself completely. "What do you mean they have something on me?" Briggs did not answer right away. He stood there with the lighter still burning in his hand, the flame licking dangerously close to his fingers, as though he had forgotten it was there at all. his eyes fixed on Caldwell with an expression that mixed grief and dread in equal measure. "Put the lighter down, Colonel," Claire said again, sharper this time, her rifle never wavering. "This is the last time I'm going to ask." Briggs finally seemed to remember himself, and he dropped the lighter onto the concrete floor, stamping out the small flame with his boot, before raising both hands slowly, the fire in the trash can still climbing behind him, threatening to spread if nobody addressed it soon. "Get that fire out!" Caldwell barked at the two soldiers who had followed them in, and they scrambled to comply, one of them grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall, while the other kicked the burning can away from the stack of remaining files, smothering the flames in a hiss of white foam that filled the small room with acrid chemical smoke. "Talk," Caldwell said, turning back to Briggs, every muscle in his body coiled with a fury he was barely containing. "Right now, everything. And so help me, if you lie to me one more time tonight, I will forget every year we spent together, and I will treat you exactly like the traitor you've apparently become." Briggs's hands trembled slightly as he lowered them, his composure, the same composure Caldwell had relied on for 3 years of shared command, finally shattering completely under the weight of everything that had happened tonight. "It started 18 months ago," he said, his voice hollow, "before you took command here. I was still adjusting to my brother's death, still not right in the head if I'm honest with you, and I made a mistake. A stupid small mistake that I thought would never matter." "What mistake?" Caldwell said. "There was a woman," Briggs said, "overseas back when I was stationed in Germany. I thought it was real. I thought God help me. I thought I'd finally found something after losing my brother, something to hold on to. It wasn't real. It was a setup from the very beginning. And by the time I understood that there were photographs, recordings, things that would have ended my career, ended my marriage, ended everything I had left if they'd ever come out." "So you sold out your country instead," Caldwell said, disgust dripping from every word. "It wasn't like that at first," Briggs said, desperation creeping into his voice now. "They didn't ask for anything at first. Months went by and nothing happened, and I started to think maybe it really was nothing. Maybe I'd escaped it. And then right before this rotation, right before you brought me here, they reached out. They said all they wanted was information. General patterns, nothing that would hurt anyone, they said, just enough to keep certain people informed. And by then, Nathan and I had convinced myself that if I said no, everything would come out anyway and I'd lose everything for nothing. So I gave them what they asked for. Small things. I told myself small things. Small things got Petrov blackmailed," Claire said coldly. "Small things put a network in place sophisticated enough to nearly kill 6 SEALs tonight. There's no such thing as small when you're the one who opens the door, Colonel." Briggs flinched at that, but he did not argue. "I know," he said. "I know that now. I think I've known it for months, if I'm honest, and I just kept telling myself I could control it, that I could keep it contained, that I could make sure nobody actually got hurt. And then tonight happened, and I realized I had been lying to myself the entire time." "You said they have something on me, too," Caldwell said, refusing to let the conversation drift away from the one detail that mattered most right now. "Explain that, now." Briggs looked at him with something that might have been pity, and Caldwell hated him for it, hated the way the man's expression suggested he was about to deliver news that would hurt worse than anything that had come before it. 6 weeks ago, Briggs said slowly, I was told to start compiling information on you specifically. Financial records, personal history, communications. I refused at first, Nathan. I want you to know that I actually refused, and they made it very clear that refusing wasn't an option anymore, not with everything they already had on me. So I did it. I don't know what they wanted it for. I never asked because I was afraid of the answer. But somebody out there has been building a file on you for over a month, and I don't think it's for a background check. Caldwell felt something cold and sick settle into his stomach. A violation that went beyond anything he had felt yet tonight, deeper than the shock of learning about the ambush, deeper even than the horror of realizing a friend had betrayed him. Someone somewhere had been quietly studying his life, his finances, his history, gathering pieces of him for a purpose he could not yet see, and the not knowing was its own particular kind of terror. Why, sir? Caldwell said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why me specifically? I don't know, Briggs said. I swear to you I don't know, but if I had to guess, and this is only a guess, Nathan, I'd say it's because you're the one person on this base whose authority nobody questions. If they wanted control over an entire command structure Over every operation running through this region, the fastest way to get it isn't to compromise a warrant officer or a communications sergeant. It's to compromise the general. The words hung in the smoke-filled air like a curse, and Caldwell felt Claire's eyes on him, watching his reaction with the same careful assessing focus she had used to study every other person in this investigation. And for one horrible second, he wondered if even she was reconsidering whether to trust him. "I haven't done anything," Caldwell said more to her than to Briggs, his voice tight with a defensive edge he couldn't quite suppress. "I believe you," Claire said quietly, and something in the simple certainty of her voice loosened the vice gripping Caldwell's chest just slightly. "If you were compromised, General, you would have shut this investigation down the second I mentioned your name on that list. You didn't. You fought for this every step of the way, even when it meant tearing apart people you trusted. That's not the behavior of a man protecting a secret. That's the behavior of a man who has nothing to hide." Briggs, watching this exchange, let out a short, bitter laugh that had no humor in it at all. "She's right, about all of it. I used to think I could tell the difference, too, between the people I could trust and the people I couldn't. Then I found out I couldn't even trust myself." "Who is running this?" Claire said, cutting through the self-pity in Briggs's voice with brutal efficiency. "You've told us how they got you, how they got Petrov, what they wanted with the general's file. Now tell us who is actually giving these orders, because Harmon told us he never got a name either, and I am done chasing shadows tonight, Colonel. I want the person at the top." Briggs hesitated, and Caldwell saw something flicker across his face, real fear this time, deeper than the fear of consequences or exposure. "I don't have a name," he said. "I told you the truth, but I have something better." "What?" Caldwell demanded. "A location," Briggs said. 3 days ago, I was told to prepare a secure transfer, a physical handoff of the general's compiled file along with everything Harmon and Petrov had gathered. I was given coordinates, a rendezvous point. I was supposed to make the drop myself tomorrow night, but obviously that's not happening now." "Where?" Claire said, her voice sharp with urgency. "An old textile warehouse about 20 kilometers south of here near the river crossing. I can give you the exact coordinates, but Claire," Briggs said, and it was the first time he had used her name, the desperation in his voice suddenly raw and unguarded. "If you go there, you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just some low-level courier picking up a data drop. Whoever runs this operation has resources I don't fully understand. Security, contingencies. I don't think either of you fully grasps how far this actually reaches." "Then help us understand," Caldwell said. "Right now, while you still have the chance to make up for even a fraction of what you've done tonight." Briggs closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, something in his posture had changed, some final decision settling over him, like a weight finally set down after being carried too long. "All right," he said, "I'll tell you everything I know. But General, I need you to know something first, and I need you to actually hear it because it matters more than you understand right now. Everything I did, every terrible decision I made trying to protect the only thing I had left after my brother died. That doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses what almost happened to those 6 men tonight. But I want you to know that somewhere in me, even while I was doing all of this, I never stopped hoping somebody would catch me before it got any worse." Caldwell looked at the man he had called a friend for 3 years, feeling grief and fury tangled together in a knot he did not know how to untie, and found he could not offer forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but he could offer something smaller, something that still mattered. "Then help us stop it," Caldwell said. "That's the only thing that matters right now." Over the next 20 minutes in the smoke-stained wreckage of the secure file room, Briggs laid out everything he knew. Coordinates, timelines, the specific communication protocols used to reach him, the general shape of a network that had clearly been operating not just on this base, but across multiple installations throughout the region, siphoning classified information out through a series of compromised personnel and funneling it toward buyers whose identities remain frustratingly obscured behind layers of anonymity and misdirection. Claire took notes, rapidly cross-referencing details against her own 3 months of surveillance, occasionally stopping to ask sharp, precise questions that pulled additional fragments of information out of Briggs that he had not initially thought to volunteer. "This warehouse," she said, finally tapping her notebook. "If the handoff was scheduled for tomorrow night, that means whoever's supposed to receive it hasn't arrived yet, which gives us a window. A window for what? Caldwell asked. A window to be there first, Claire said, her eyes lighting with the same focused intensity Caldwell had seen on the mountainside hours earlier, right before she had turned an impossible situation into a rescue that should not have been possible. If we can secure that location before the handoff, we have a chance to identify who's actually running this network instead of chasing another dead end. That's incredibly dangerous, Caldwell said. We don't know what kind of security they'll have in place. No, we don't, Claire agreed. But we know they're expecting a routine handoff, not a raid. That gives us an advantage they don't know we have. In general, I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for a safer option. If this network realizes tonight's operation failed, if they realize Briggs, Harmon, and Petrov are all compromised, they will burn this entire operation down and disappear before anyone gets close to them again. We move now or we may never get another chance. Caldwell looked at Briggs still standing there under armed guard, his career and possibly his freedom already gone, and felt the full weight of command settle onto his shoulders in a way it had not all night. 6 men had nearly died hours ago. A traitor stood in front of him, a man he had trusted completely. And now Claire was proposing to walk into an unknown location, possibly guarded by people with resources Briggs himself did not fully understand, based on nothing more than a confession extracted under duress. If I authorize this, Caldwell said slowly, I need to know you understand exactly what you might be walking into. I've walked into worse with less information, Claire said simply. General, I appreciate the concern, but I didn't spend 3 months tracking this network just to stop the moment we finally have a real lead. I need your authorization and I need a small element to support the operation, but I am going to that warehouse tonight with or without official sign-off. Because every hour we wait is an hour that gives whoever's really in charge time to disappear. Caldwell studied her for a long moment, weighing the recklessness of what she was proposing against everything he had already witnessed her accomplish in a single impossible night, and found somewhat to his own surprise that he trusted her judgment more than he trusted his own instinct for caution. You're not going alone, he said. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't dream of it. Claire said, the faintest hint of something like relief crossing her expression. I'll need a small team, quiet, capable of moving without drawing attention. In general, I'd like you to remain here. If this goes wrong, if the network realizes we're onto them and decides to make one last move, this base needs its commanding officer in place, not chasing shadows 20 kilometers south. Caldwell felt every instinct in his body rebel against the idea of sending her into danger while he stayed behind in relative safety, but he recognized, even through his frustration, the wisdom in what she was saying. A base without its commander in the middle of an active security crisis was a base vulnerable to exactly the kind of chaos that had already cost them so much tonight. Fine, he said reluctantly, but you keep comms open the entire time, and the second anything looks wrong, you pull back. I am not explaining to anyone why the woman who saved 6 of my men died chasing a lead I authorized. Claire's mouth curved into the first genuine smile Caldwell had seen from her all night, small and tired but real. General, with respect, I don't plan on dying tonight. I've got too many more questions that need answering. Within the hour, a 6-man element that had assembled, handpicked by Claire herself from soldiers she had briefly observed throughout the chaos of the evening, choosing not by rank or reputation, but by something Caldwell couldn't quite identify, some instinct for who would hold steady under pressure, that had clearly been honed by years of operating in situations where the wrong choice of teammate meant the difference between life and death. Reyes, despite Caldwell's initial reluctance, insisted on joining the communications element, supporting the operation from a mobile command post positioned just outside the warehouse perimeter, her earlier fear replaced by a fierce determination to see this through to the end. Sir, she said when Caldwell tried once more to convince her to remain on base. With respect, I have been on that radio every single time something has gone wrong tonight. I am not sitting this last part out. Caldwell, recognizing the same stubborn resolve in her that he had seen in Claire hours earlier, finally relented. As the team prepared to move out, loading into 2 unmarked vehicles that would approach the warehouse from different directions to avoid drawing attention, Caldwell found himself standing beside Claire one last time before she climbed into the lead vehicle, the weight of everything that had happened tonight settling heavily between them. Claire, he said, using her first name for the first time since she had walked into his command tent hours earlier, a lifetime ago. It felt like now. Whatever happens tonight, whatever we find at that warehouse, I want you to know something. When I grabbed that rifle strap and threatened you with prison, I was wrong. completely wrong. And I don't say that lightly. Claire looked at him, something softening in her expression that had not been there through the entire brutal efficiency of the last several hours. You were protecting your men, General Hall. I understand that better than almost anyone. I've spent my entire career being questioned by people who couldn't understand how someone who looks like me could do what I do. I stopped being angry about it a long time ago. It just means I have to prove myself every single time to every single person, and honestly, that used to make me bitter. It doesn't anymore. It just makes me patient. You shouldn't have to prove anything, Caldwell said. Not after tonight, not after any of it. Maybe not, Claire said, but the world doesn't always work the way it should, General. All any of us can do is keep showing up anyway. She paused, checking the action on her rifle one final time, the same weapon that had saved 6 lives in a mountain valley what felt like 100 years ago instead of just a handful of hours. I'll radio the second we have eyes on the location. If this goes the way I think it will, we're about to find out exactly who's been pulling the strings on this entire operation. She climbed into the vehicle and Caldwell watched the small convoy pull away into the darkness, disappearing down the same road that had carried them toward the airstrip in Harmon's attempted escape, not long before the night stretching out ahead of them with no promise of when or if it would finally end. Back in the command tent, Caldwell paced, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything except the radio silence stretching between updates each minute, crawling by with an agony that felt disproportionate even to everything that had already happened tonight. Briggs sat under guard in the corner, his head bowed, saying nothing further, the weight of his confession seeming to have drained every last bit of fight out of him. General, Rhea's voice finally crackled through the radio after what felt like an eternity, but had only been 18 minutes. Team is in position outside the warehouse perimeter, requesting permission to begin approach. Granted, Caldwell said, gripping the radio so tightly his knuckles ached. Proceed with caution. I want updates every 2 minutes, no exceptions. Copy, General. The minutes that followed were some of the longest of Caldwell's life, longer even than the hours he had spent listening to Ghost Team's desperate radio calls from that mountain valley, because now the danger belonged to someone he had come in the span of a single impossible night to genuinely respect and care about, someone whose safety felt suddenly urgently personal in a way that surprised him with its intensity. Command, this is Claire. Her voice came through, finally low and controlled, despite the tension Caldwell could hear threaded through it. We have eyes on the warehouse, minimal visible security, 2 guards at the main entrance, standard small arms, nothing that suggests they're expecting trouble. But General, there's a vehicle parked around back that doesn't match anything in the local registry we've been able to identify. Diplomatic plates. Caldwell felt his blood run cold. Diplomatic plates. Claire, that changes everything. If there's foreign diplomatic involvement in this, I know what it means, General. Claire said, her voice tight. It means this goes exactly as high as Briggs warned us it might. We're moving in to get a closer look. Stand by my meeting. The radio went quiet and Caldwell stood frozen in the command tent, every second of silence, stretching into an eternity, his mind racing through the implications of what Claire had just told him. Diplomatic plates meant this was no longer simply a matter of a compromised warrant officer and a blackmailed intelligence officer selling secrets for personal gain. This meant state-level involvement, a fully foreign intelligence operation running not just through his base, but potentially through installations across the entire region, using American soldiers as unwitting or unwilling pawns in a much larger, much more dangerous game. Command, this is Claire. Her voice returned after what felt like an unbearable stretch of silence, and Caldwell could hear something new in her tone now, an edge of genuine shock that he had not heard from her even in the worst moments of the night. General, you need to hear this. We've got a visual through the warehouse window. There's a meeting already underway inside 3 people, and General, I recognize one of them. Who? Caldwell demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. It's someone from this base, Claire said. Someone who was in that debrief tent with us tonight. General, I don't think Petrov, Whitfield, and Harmon were the only names on that list who needed to be crossed off. I think we missed one, and they've been sitting in the same room with us this entire time, watching everything we've been doing, feeding it directly to whoever's on the other side of this. Caldwell's mind raced through the faces from that debrief tent, through every name Claire had listed hours earlier, and felt a fresh wave of dread settle over him as he realized there was only one person from that original list of 7 who had not yet been accounted for, who had not yet been questioned, cleared, or exposed. Doyle, he said, the name coming out of him like a curse. Captain Doyle. The radio crackled with confirmation Caldwell had already known was coming before Claire even spoke the words. Confirmed, General, Claire said grimly. Captain Doyle is standing in that warehouse right now, and from what we can see through this window, he's not the one receiving orders. General, I think Captain Doyle is the one giving them. The words landed in the command tent like a second detonation, and Caldwell felt the floor of his understanding shift yet again, a sensation that was becoming sickeningly familiar with every passing hour of this endless night. Doyle, he said again, as if repeating the name might somehow make it easier to accept. He's a logistics captain. He coordinates resupply schedules. He doesn't have the clearance or the access to run something like this. Maybe not officially, Claire said, her voice low and controlled through the radio, though Caldwell could hear the tension coil beneath every word. But think about it, General. Logistics touches everything. Doyle would know troop movement timing because he coordinates the convoys that support it. He'd know supply chain vulnerabilities better than almost anyone on this base because he's the one managing them. He's been sitting in plain sight this entire time, the one person nobody would think to suspect because his job looks boring on paper. That's exactly the kind of position somebody smart would want if they were building a network like this. Caldwell pressed a hand against his forehead, trying to steady the spinning chaos of the last several hours into something he could actually act on. What's he doing right now? Can you hear anything? Negative on audio, we're too far out, and I'm not risking closing the distance until we understand what kind of security is actually protecting that building, Claire said. But general body language is telling me plenty. Doyle's not nervous. He's not being questioned or threatened. He's standing at the head of that table like he belongs there, like he's run meetings like this before. Whoever the other two people are, they're deferring to him. Can you identify the other two? One's male, older, maybe 50s, dressed like local civilian but carrying himself like military or intelligence background, definitely not just some middleman. The other's female, younger, and she's the one who arrived in the vehicle with diplomatic plates. If I had to guess, General, and I hate that I even have to guess, right now I'd say she's the actual connection to whatever foreign interest is funding this. Caldwell's mind raced through the implications, each one worse than the last. If Doyle had been coordinating with a foreign intelligence contact this entire time, quietly building a network across multiple compromised personnel, feeding classified operational data outward for months, then tonight's ambush was not an isolated failure. It was the visible edge of something far larger, something that had been operating undetected right under his command for far longer than he wanted to admit. Claire, he said, I need you to understand something before you go any further. If there's genuine foreign intelligence involvement here, this stops being a base security matter. This becomes something that needs to go up my chain of command immediately, something that involves people well above my pay grade. I understand that, General, Claire said, and the second we have hard evidence, I will make sure it goes exactly where it needs to go. But right now, tonight, in the next few minutes, we have a closing window to gather that evidence before this meeting ends, and everyone in that warehouse disappears into separate cars, heading in separate directions, and we lose the only chance we're going to get to connect Doyle directly to whoever's funding this. What do you need from me? Authorization, Claire said. I want to get close enough to plant a recording device and pull photographic evidence of everyone in that room. That's it. No engagement, no arrest tonight, just proof. If we move on Doyle without proof, a defense attorney tears apart everything Briggs and Harmon already gave us because both of their confessions could be framed as men trying to shift blame to save themselves. But if I get photographic evidence of Doyle standing in a room with a foreign intelligence contact and an unidentified handler, there's no story he can tell that explains that away. Caldwell closed his eyes for a moment, weighing the risk against the necessity, feeling the full crushing weight of command settle onto his shoulders one more time in a night that had already demanded more decisions than he had made in the past several months combined. Do it, he said. But Claire, listen to me. The second something feels wrong, the second anything shifts, you pull out. I don't care if you're 30 seconds from getting the photograph that solves everything. I am not losing you over evidence we can find another way. Copy that, General, Claire said, and there was something in her voice, brief and warm, that told Caldwell his concern had landed somewhere real. Moving in now. Radio silence for the next several minutes. I'll check in the moment I'm clear. The radio went quiet and Caldwell stood alone in the command tent with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat and the distant hum of the generator, staring at a piece of equipment that had suddenly become the most important object in his entire world, willing it to crackle back to life with good news. Beside him, Briggs shifted in his seat, still under guard, watching Caldwell's visible anguish, with an expression that mixed guilt and something almost like sympathy. "She's good," Briggs said quietly. "I mean that, Nathan. Whatever program built her, whatever they put her through to get her to this level, she's the real thing. I've never seen anyone move through a crisis the way she has tonight." "I don't need your opinion on her," Caldwell said, sharper than he intended, the fear for Claire's safety curdling into irritation he could not fully direct anywhere productive. Briggs accepted the rebuke without argument, falling silent again, and Caldwell resumed his pacing, the minutes stretching out with an agony that felt disproportionate even against everything else that had happened tonight. 6 minutes passed, then 8, then 10, and Caldwell's mind had begun constructing increasingly catastrophic scenarios, each one worse than the last, when the radio finally crackled back to life. "Command, this is Claire." Her voice was steady, but Caldwell could hear something underneath it now, an urgency that had not been there before. "I have the photographs. Clear shots of all 3 individuals. In general, I got something better than I expected." "What?" Caldwell said, gripping the radio. "Audio," Claire said. "I got close enough to catch part of the conversation before I had to pull back." Doyle wasn't just receiving information tonight. He was giving an update on Ghost Team's failed ambush, explaining what went wrong. In general, he specifically mentioned an unknown shooter interfering with the operation. He described me in detail, which means somebody in that room already suspects there's an unaccounted variable operating on this base, and it's only a matter of time before they connect that variable directly to me. Caldwell's stomach twisted. "Then you need to get out of there right now." "Already moving," Claire said. "But General, that's not even the worst part of what I heard." "Then what is?" There was a pause on the line, brief but heavy, the kind of pause that told Caldwell whatever came next was going to be worse than anything that had come before it tonight, and given everything that had already happened, that was a genuinely terrifying thought. "The woman with the diplomatic plates," Claire said. She used a phrase I recognized. "An operational designation. General, this isn't just about your base. This network Doyle's been running, it's part of something larger, something that's been feeding information out of multiple American installations across this entire region for at least 2 years. Ghost Team's ambush tonight wasn't the beginning of anything. It was one small piece of an operation that's been running successfully undetected for far longer than any of us wanted to believe." Caldwell felt the full scale of what they had stumbled into settle over him, like a physical weight crushing and disorienting all at once. This was no longer a matter of one compromised warrant officer, one blackmailed intelligence officer, one desperate executive officer caught in a trap he couldn't escape. This was an operation that stretched far beyond the boundaries of his command, touching installations he had never even visited, endangering soldiers he would never meet, and it had been happening in the shadows for years, while nobody, not him, not his predecessors, not the entire chain of command above him, had noticed. "Get back here," Caldwell said, his voice hoarse. "Right now. We need to get this evidence to people who can act on it at a level neither of us has authority over." "Copy, General. We're moving out now. ETA, back to base approximately 20 minutes. The radio went quiet again, and Caldwell turned to look at Briggs, who had been listening to every word of the exchange with an expression of dawning horror that mirrored what Caldwell himself was feeling. "You didn't know it went this far," Caldwell said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Briggs said, his voice barely a whisper. "I swear to you, Nathan, I had no idea. I thought I was one small compromised piece feeding information to one contact. I never imagined God. I never imagined it was connected to something this large." Caldwell studied him for a long moment, trying to decide whether he believed him, and found somewhat to his own surprise that he did. Briggs's horror looked genuine, the kind of shock that could not easily be faked by a man who had already confessed to so much else tonight. "That doesn't excuse what you did," Caldwell said quietly, "but it does tell me you're not the architect of this. You're just another casualty of it, the same as Petrov, the same as those 6 men who nearly died on that mountainside tonight." Briggs's eyes filled with tears. He did not bother to hide anymore. "What happens now?" "Now," Caldwell said, "we wait for Claire to get back here with proof, and then this stops being my problem to solve alone. This goes up the chain all the way up to people with the authority to unravel a network that's apparently been operating across an entire region for years. And you, Colonel, you're going to cooperate with every single person who asks you a question from this point forward, because right now your cooperation is the only thing standing between you and spending the rest of your life in a military prison. Briggs nodded slowly, accepting the terms with the resignation of a man who understood he had no other options left. The next 20 minutes passed in a haze of radio check-ins and mounting tension. Caldwell alternating between pacing the length of the command tent and staring at maps spread across the folding table, trying to piece together the scope of what they had uncovered, trying to imagine how many other bases, how many other units, how many other soldiers had been quietly endangered by a network he had known nothing about until tonight. When the convoy finally rolled back through the main gate, Caldwell was waiting, and the relief that flooded through him at the sight of Claire climbing out of the lead vehicle, unharmed, rifle slung across her back, was so overwhelming it nearly buckled his knees. "You're all right," he said, more statement than question, needing to hear it confirmed anyway. "I'm all right," Claire said, though the exhaustion in her voice was undeniable now. The adrenaline of the operation finally beginning to fade and reveal just how long and how brutal this night had actually been for her. "General, we need to talk. Somewhere private. What I found in that warehouse changes everything about how we handle the next 24 hours. They moved into the command tent, and Claire laid out the photographs on the folding table, along with a small digital recorder she pulled from her vest, the physical proof of everything she had described over the radio, now sitting in front of Caldwell in stark, undeniable clarity. He stared at the images at Doyle's face caught mid-sentence in a room with two people who had no business being anywhere near an American military installation, and felt the full weight of betrayal settle over him one final time. "This goes to General Whitcomb immediately," Caldwell said, naming his direct superior, a man whose judgment Caldwell trusted completely. One of the very few people left tonight he still felt certain he could rely on without reservation. "Tonight, right now, this can't wait until morning." "Agreed," Claire said. "But General, there's something else you need to know before you make that call. Something I haven't told you yet because I needed to be certain first." Caldwell felt his stomach clench in anticipation of yet another revelation. Uncertain how much more his exhausted mind could absorb tonight, but bracing himself anyway. "Tell me." Claire reached into her vest and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, worn at the edges as though it had been carried and reread many times over recent weeks, and held it out to him with an expression that told Caldwell whatever was written there was about to become the most important piece of this entire night's puzzle. 3 months ago," she said quietly, "before any of this started, before Ghost Team, before Petrov, before I even knew this network existed, I intercepted a different transmission. One I couldn't fully decode at the time. I've been carrying it with me ever since, trying to make sense of it. General, I think what I heard in that warehouse tonight just gave me the key I needed to finally understand what it says." Caldwell unfolded the paper with hands that were not quite steady and stared down at a string of coordinates and a single word written beneath them in Claire's careful handwriting, a word that made the blood drain entirely from his face the moment he understood what it meant. "Claire," he said slowly, looking up at her. "Is this what I think it is?" Claire held his gaze steady and grave, the calm of a soldier delivering news she had clearly been dreading having to share. "General," she said, "I think that network isn't finished with this base. I think tonight was a test, a small operation to see if their system could survive exposure. And I think whatever they're planning next is a great deal bigger than an ambush in a mountain valley." Caldwell stared at the word on that paper until the letters seemed to blur, until his mind fully absorbed what Claire was telling him. And when he finally looked up at her, his voice came out barely above a whisper. "Sanctuary," he read aloud. "What does that mean? What is sanctuary?" Claire's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, when I intercepted that first transmission near the border, I caught this single word buried inside encrypted traffic I couldn't fully break. I thought it might be a code name for a person, maybe a handler, maybe an asset. I've spent 3 months trying to attach a meaning to it and getting nowhere. But tonight in that warehouse, I heard the woman with the diplomatic plates say it out loud to Doyle. She wasn't talking about a person, General. She was talking about a location, a target. "What target?" "I don't know yet," Claire admitted, and the honesty in her voice, the willingness to say, "I don't know," after an entire night of being the one person who always seemed to have an answer, hit Caldwell harder than he expected. "But she used the word the way you'd use a target designation for an operation still in planning." not something that already happened, something that hasn't happened yet. Caldwell's mind raced through every installation, every convoy route, every high-value target within striking distance of this region, trying to imagine what could be significant enough to warrant a code name whispered between a foreign contact and a compromised American officer. Could it be another ambush? Something targeting a different unit? Maybe, Claire said. But General, think about the scale of what we uncovered tonight. Petrov gave away drone surveillance data. Harmon was compiling financial and personal records. Whitfield was willing to murder a bound prisoner to protect the operation. Briggs was tasked specifically with building a file on you, the base commander. That's not the profile of a network planning another small ambush in a mountain valley. That's the profile of a network building towards something with far higher stakes. The radio on the folding table crackled suddenly and Reyes's voice came through tight with urgency. General, I need you in the intelligence tent right now. We just intercepted something on the emergency frequency and sir, it's bad. Caldwell and Claire moved fast, crossing the base at a near run, the exhaustion of the night momentarily forgotten, beneath a fresh surge of adrenaline. They found Reyes hunched over a communications console, her face pale in the glow of the monitor, headphones pressed to one ear. What is it? Caldwell demanded. Sir, we picked up burst transmission on a frequency we don't normally monitor encrypted, but our system flagged it because it used the same cipher pattern Claire identified in her original intercept 3 months ago. I ran it through decryption and got a partial translation. General, it references a fuel and munitions depot. Coordinates match a forward logistics hub about 40 kilometers from here, the one that supplies 3 separate outposts across this entire sector. Claire's face went hard. Sanctuary, that's it. That's the target. What did the transmission say exactly? Caldwell asked, his stomach dropping. Reyes swallowed hard. It said confirms Sanctuary Window 0400 assets in position. Sir, that's less than 3 hours from now. Caldwell felt the floor drop out from under him for what felt like the 100th time that night. A fuel and munitions depot supplying 3 outposts that meant hundreds of soldiers depending on that supply line, meant an explosion at that scale could kill dozens, if not hundreds of people instantly, and cripple operations across the entire region for months. This was not another isolated ambush. This was designed to be catastrophic. Get me that depot security commander on the line right now, Caldwell barked. And I want every available quick reaction asset moving toward that location immediately. Sir, Reyes said, already working the radio, the depot security team is going to need more than a warning. If there are already assets in position, this could already be past the point where a simple lockdown stops it. Claire was pulling up a tactical map on the adjacent console, her fingers moving fast cross-referencing the coordinates against terrain data. General, if they're planning to hit a fuel and munitions depot at 0400, they've had time to pre-position explosives personnel, whatever they need. We can't just alert the depot and hope their existing security handles it. We need eyes on the ground there immediately, and we need people who know exactly what they're looking for. You're not going alone this time, Caldwell said, before she could even suggest it. Not to something this size. I wasn't going to suggest that, Claire said, and there was something almost like gratitude in the quick glance she gave him. General, this is bigger than anything I can handle solo, and bigger than anything your base's quick reaction force can handle without proper coordination. We need to loop in every asset within striking distance of that depot, and we need to do it in the next few minutes because if that transmission is accurate, we have less than 3 hours before this becomes a catastrophe that makes tonight's ambush look small by comparison. Caldwell was already moving toward the secure communications console reserved for contacting higher command, his hands steady now despite the chaos of everything happening around him, some deep well of command instinct rising up to meet the crisis the way it always had across 28 years of service. Get me General Whitcomb, he said, immediately. Tell him it's a sanctuary-level emergency. He'll understand the urgency the second he hears that. Within minutes, the secure line connected, and Caldwell laid out everything. The ambush, Petrov's confession, Whitfield's attempted murder of a prisoner, Harmon's attempted flight, Briggs's confession about the file being built on Caldwell himself, and now this, a planned attack on a critical fuel and munitions depot less than 3 hours away. General Whitcomb, a gravel-voiced veteran of more conflicts than Caldwell could count, listened without interrupting, and when Caldwell finally finished, there was a long pause on the line. Nathan, Whitcomb said, finally his voice grim, I'm not going to lie to you. This is worse than anything I expected to hear tonight. But you did the right thing calling me directly instead of trying to handle this entirely within your own command. I'm authorizing immediate reinforcement to that depot full quick reaction assets from the regional command. And I want every person you have identified tonight, Doyle, the foreign contacts from that warehouse, all of them detained the second we have operational bandwidth to move on them without tipping off whoever's still out there. There's something else, sir, Caldwell said. The operative who uncovered all of this, Lieutenant Commander Whitmore, she needs to be part of the response team heading to that depot. She's the only person who's had eyes on this network from the beginning, and her read on the situation has been right every single time tonight. There was a brief pause on the line. Whitmore, Whitcomb repeated slowly. I know that name, I know that program, put her on. Claire took the handset, her expression unreadable as she listened to whatever Whitcomb said to her, offering only clipped professional responses that gave Caldwell no window into the conversation until she finally handed the radio back. He's authorized full support, she said. Quick reaction force is already mobilizing toward the depot. General, we need to move now if we're going to have any chance of getting there before 0400. The next several minutes passed in a blur of urgent motion, Caldwell coordinating with the depot's security commander over secure lines, Reyes managing communications between multiple moving elements. Claire assembling a strike team from the same soldiers who had accompanied her to the warehouse hours earlier, their exhaustion from that operation replaced by a grim, focused determination once they understood the scale of what was now at stake. Caldwell found himself climbing into the lead vehicle alongside Claire. Despite every argument his rational mind offered against it, unable to stomach the idea of remaining behind, while soldiers under his command drove toward what might be the deadliest few hours of this entire crisis. You said I needed to stay behind last time, he said as the convoy pulled out through the main gate, tearing down the highway corridor toward the depot, with headlights cutting sharp lines through the pre-dawn darkness. That was different, Claire said. That was a data drop, a chance to gather evidence quietly. This is an active attack in progress. I need every capable body I can get, and General, like it or not, you know that depot's defensive layout better than anyone else on this convoy. We need that knowledge. The drive stretched on in tense silence, broken only by intermittent radio updates from the depot's security team confirming no visible unusual activity. Yet though the darkness made comprehensive surveillance difficult, and every soldier in that convoy understood that the absence of visible threats did not mean the absence of threats at all. Command, this is Overwatch, a voice crackled through the radio as they neared the depot's perimeter. We've got thermal signatures approaching the depot's eastern fence line, 4 individuals moving with tactical spacing, definitely not friendly personnel. That's them, Claire said, gripping her rifle. General, they're already in position. We need to move now. The convoy screeched to a halt just outside the depot's perimeter, soldiers pouring out and moving into defensive positions with a speed and coordination that reflected months' years of training finally being put to use in exactly the crisis it had been designed for. Claire moved at the front of the formation, her earlier exhaustion completely gone, replaced by the same lethal focus Caldwell had witnessed from her at the very beginning of this endless night on that ridge, saving 6 men who should have died in an ambush that was never supposed to be survivable. Eastern fence line, she said, studying the terrain with rapid assessing eyes. That's the maintenance access gate, minimal lighting, easiest point of entry if you're trying to avoid the main security checkpoints. Whoever planned this knew exactly where the depot's weak points were. Doyle, Caldwell said grimly. He'd know the logistics layout of every depot in this region. Which means he's probably not physically here, Claire said. He's the planner, not the operator. Whoever's actually executing this attack is someone else, someone willing to get their hands dirty in a way Doyle's been careful to avoid all along. The depot security team, alerted and mobilized in the time since Caldwell's initial warning, had already established a defensive perimeter. But Claire moved with a purpose that suggested she intended to do far more than simply reinforce an existing defense. General, I need to get eyes on those 4 individuals before they reach whatever position they're planning to detonate from. If they're carrying explosives designed to breach a fuel storage facility, we cannot afford to let them get close enough to place charges. Then we intercept them before they reach the fence line, Caldwell said. Claire nodded, already moving, gesturing for her small strike team to fan out along a route that would put them between the approaching threat and the depot's most vulnerable storage tanks. Caldwell followed, adrenaline overriding the bone-deep exhaustion that had been building in him for hours, every sense heightened by the knowledge that hundreds of lives and the operational capability of an entire region's worth of American forces hung on what happened in the next several minutes. They moved through the darkness in near silence, communicating through hand signals, learned over a career of similar operations, and Caldwell found himself falling into an old rhythm he had not used in years, the muscle memory of a much younger soldier reasserting itself, despite the 2 decades that had passed since he'd last moved through hostile terrain in the dark like this. "Contact!" Claire whispered, suddenly dropping into a low crouch, her rifle rising with fluid precision. Ahead through gaps in the scrub brush lining the depot's perimeter, 4 shapes moved with deliberate practiced care, carrying equipment that even in silhouette was unmistakably not standard infantry gear. "Those are breaching charges," Claire murmured. "General, that's enough explosive to take down a fence line in seconds and potentially trigger a chain reaction through the fuel storage if they get close enough to the primary tanks. We cannot let them reach that fence." "Options," Caldwell whispered back. "We take them now before they realize we're here," Claire said. "The second they know we're onto them, they'll either detonate early out of desperation or scatter, and either outcome is worse than stopping this cleanly right now." She raised a hand, signaling her team into position, and Caldwell watched with a mixture of awe and dread as 6 soldiers, exhausted from a night that had already asked everything of them, moved into a coordinated encirclement of 4 armed individuals with the kind of silent precision that spoke to hours of training, finally paying off in the moment that mattered most. "On my mark," Claire whispered. The next several seconds unfolded with a speed that left Caldwell's mind struggling to process each individual moment, even as it happened. Claire's voice, suddenly sharp and commanding, cutting through the darkness with an order to surrender that gave the 4 figures exactly 1 chance to comply. A brief, tense pause in which nobody moved. Then one of the 4 panicking, reaching for something at his belt, and the night exploding into brief, violent chaos, as Claire's team responded with an overwhelming, precisely controlled show of force that ended the confrontation in under 15 seconds. 3 of the 4 attackers down and restrained, the 4th killed instantly when he attempted to trigger what turned out to be a handheld detonator rather than surrender. "Clear," Claire called out, her voice steady despite the violence that had just unfolded. "General, we need EOD on those charges immediately, and we need it now because I don't know if that detonator was connected to a dead man's switch." The following 20 minutes passed in a controlled frenzy of activity, an explosive ordnance disposal team arriving to carefully assess and disable the breaching charges the attackers had been carrying, confirming that had they reached the fence line and detonated as planned, the resulting explosion would have triggered a catastrophic chain reaction through the depot's fuel storage capable of leveling the entire facility and likely killing dozens of the security personnel and support staff stationed there. Caldwell stood at the edge of the secured perimeter, watching the sun begin to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that felt almost obscene given everything that had happened in the darkness that preceded it, and felt the full weight of exhaustion finally begin to catch up with him now that the immediate crisis had passed. "We stopped it," he said quietly, almost unable to believe the words as he said them. "We actually stopped it." "We did," Claire said, standing beside him, her own exhaustion now visible in a way it had not been throughout the entire night, the adrenaline that had carried her through crisis after crisis finally beginning to ebb now that there was nothing immediate left to fight. "But General, this isn't over. We stopped tonight's attack. We haven't stopped the network behind it. Doyle's still out there. The foreign contacts from that warehouse are still out there. And somewhere someone above all of them is still running an operation that's clearly bigger than anything either of us fully understands yet." Caldwell nodded slowly, the truth of her words settling over him with the weight of a responsibility that was not going to end simply because they had survived one impossibly long night. "Then we keep going," he said. "We follow this as far as it leads, no matter how high it goes." The interrogation of the 3 surviving attackers began within the hour conducted by intelligence specialists Wickham had dispatched immediately after learning the scale of what Caldwell's base had uncovered, and the information they provided slowly, reluctantly, under the weight of overwhelming evidence and the promise of leniency in exchange for cooperation, painted a picture even more disturbing than anything Caldwell had imagined during the darkest hours of that endless night. The network Doyle had been operating within was not simply feeding information to a single foreign intelligence service for profit. It was part of a larger, more sophisticated operation designed to systematically undermine American logistics and operational capability across an entire theater, gathering intelligence, compromising personnel, and when the opportunity presented itself, executing physical attacks designed to look like isolated insurgent activity rather than coordinated foreign intelligence operations. Ghost Team's ambush had never been meant to kill all 6 men outright, Claire explained later. Once the pieces had finally come together clearly enough to understand, it had been a test designed to assess whether the network's information could translate into successful battlefield exploitation without immediately exposing the underlying leak. When Claire's intervention had disrupted that test, when 6 men who should have died had instead walked away alive, the network had panicked, accelerating a timeline that had originally called for a much longer period of careful, undetected operation before an attack on something as significant as the fuel and munitions depot. "We forced their hand," Claire said, sitting across from Caldwell in the intelligence tent, as the morning sun climbed higher outside, both of them nursing cups of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and neither of them quite able to bring themselves to care. "If I hadn't been in that valley last night, Ghost Team dies, the network's test succeeds without exposure, and they continue operating patiently for months, maybe years, building towards something even larger than a single depot attack. In a strange way, General Tonight's disaster is the reason we caught this before it became something truly catastrophic." "Small comfort," Caldwell said, though he understood the truth in what she was saying, even as the exhaustion of the last several hours made it difficult to feel genuine gratitude for anything yet. Doyle was apprehended 2 hours later, taken into custody at his quarters without incident, his composure shattering almost immediately under interrogation. Once he understood the scope of evidence already assembled against him, the photographs, the audio recording the testimony of 3 captured attackers who had no reason left to protect a man who had sent them on a mission that ended in death and capture. He talked eventually providing names, contact protocols, and operational details that intelligence analysts would spend weeks unpacking, revealing a network that stretched across 4 separate installations and had been operating in various forms for nearly 3 years before finally being exposed. The woman with the diplomatic plates identified through the photographs Claire had captured turned out to be attached to a foreign embassy under a cover identity that had allowed her freedom of movement throughout the region for years without raising suspicion, though by the time authorities moved to detain her formally, she had already invoked diplomatic immunity and been quietly expelled from the country, a resolution that left Caldwell furious, but that Claire accepted with the weary resignation of someone who had seen this particular outcome play out before in other operations, other networks, other betrayals that never quite received the full justice they deserved. "It's not fair," Caldwell said when the news came through that the woman had already boarded a flight out of the country untouchable behind the protective shield of diplomatic status. She was standing right there. She was part of planning an attack that could have killed dozens of American soldiers, and she just walks away. "I know," Claire said quietly. "It happens more than you'd think, General. The people closest to the ground, the ones who get their hands dirty, they're the ones who pay the price. The people who operate from behind diplomatic cover, who never touch a weapon or plant a charge themselves, they're protected by systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of international incident that would come from arresting a foreign national with immunity. It's not justice, but it's often the reality of this work." "How do you live with that?" Caldwell asked, genuinely curious, watching her face for some sign of the anger he felt burning in his own chest. Claire considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I focus on what we did stop," she said. 6 men are alive who shouldn't be. A depot full of soldiers didn't die in an explosion this morning. Doyle's network is exposed and dismantled, at least the piece of it operating in this region. I can't control what happens to people protected by diplomatic status, General. I can only control whether I show up, whether I do the work, whether I catch what I can catch. The rest I have to let go of, or it eats you alive." Petrov, who had confessed early and cooperated fully with every subsequent request for information, faced a court-martial that ultimately resulted in a reduced sentence in exchange for his continued cooperation with the ongoing investigation into the broader network. His gambling debts and the blackmail that had ensnared him treated as mitigating factors, even as the court made clear that his actions had nearly cost 6 men their lives. Whitfield survived his surgery, though he would never regain full use of his left arm, and when he finally regained consciousness 2 days later, He provided the final pieces of information that allowed investigators to fully map the network's communication structure, revealing that he had been recruited not through blackmail, but through genuine ideological sympathy for the foreign interests. He had ultimately served a revelation that Caldwell found somehow more disturbing than either Petrov's desperation or Harmon's greed, the idea that a man could simply choose without coercion to betray the uniform he wore. Harmon faced the most severe consequences of the network's exposed members. His role as the primary architect of the operational side of the network, the one who had actually built and maintained the systems that allowed information to flow from compromised personnel to foreign contacts, earning him a court-martial that would almost certainly result in decades of imprisonment. His career, his freedom, and his family's respect for him, all destroyed in the wreckage of choices he had made for reasons that, even after extensive interrogation, never fully made sense to anyone trying to understand them. Briggs's case proved the most complicated. His cooperation in providing the location and details that ultimately allowed the depot attack to be stopped weighed carefully against the severity of his initial betrayal. The months he had spent compromising his position under threat of blackmail before finally breaking under the weight of guilt and confessing everything the moment he was cornered. Caldwell found himself in the days that followed called upon to provide testimony regarding Briggs's character and found the task nearly impossible, unable to reconcile the friend he had trusted for 3 years with the man who had built a file on him under coercion, unable to fully forgive him, but equally unable to condemn him with the same finality he felt toward Harmon or Whitfield. "I don't know what to say about him," Caldwell admitted to Claire one evening nearly a week after that impossible night, the two of them sitting outside the command tent as the base slowly returned to something resembling normal operations, the investigation into the broader network continuing at a level far above either of their direct involvement now. "He betrayed everything I thought I knew about him, but he also gave us the information that saved that depot. If he hadn't broken when he did, hundreds of people might be dead right now." "That's the thing about betrayal, General," Claire said, staring out at the darkening horizon, the same kind of dusk that had preceded the night everything had begun. "It's rarely as simple as good people and bad people. Most of the time, it's people who made one terrible decision and then had to live inside the consequences of that decision every single day, watching it grow into something they never intended, until finally they either drown in it completely or they find enough courage to try to make it right, even knowing it might destroy them to do so. Briggs chose the second path eventually. That doesn't erase what he did, but it's not nothing either." Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, watching the same stars that had witnessed everything that happened that endless night begin to emerge overhead. "You've done this a lot, haven't you?" he said finally. "Watched people make impossible choices. Judged where the line is between someone who deserves a second chance and someone who doesn't." "More than I'd like to admit," Claire said. "It's the part of this work nobody talks about. Everyone wants to hear about the shot from 2,000 yards, the impossible rescue the moment everything comes together. Nobody wants to hear about the weeks afterward, sorting through the wreckage of people's choices, trying to figure out who's salvageable and who isn't." "And me," Caldwell said. "Where do I fall in that assessment? You had my name on that list too, remember?" Claire looked at him, something genuine and warm crossing her face for the first time since the exhaustion of the last week had settled fully over both of them. "General, you cleared yourself the moment you let me pursue this investigation, even when it meant tearing apart people you trusted, even when it meant risking your own career and reputation to expose a network operating right under your command. People who are compromised don't do that. They protect themselves first. You protected the truth first every single time, even when it cost you something you clearly valued." Caldwell felt something loosen in his chest at her words, a validation he had not realized he needed until she offered it. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. I don't think I ever properly said that. I threatened you with prison the first time we met." Claire's mouth curved into a genuine smile, tired but real. "You did. In fairness, General showing up as an unidentified sniper in the middle of an active combat zone tends to raise a few questions." "Fair point," Caldwell said, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he found himself laughing. A small, exhausted sound, but a real one. The first genuine moment of levity in a week that had been dominated entirely by betrayal, violence, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust in a command structure that had been shattered from within. In the weeks that followed, as the investigation into the broader network continued to unfold across multiple installations and involved agencies far above Caldwell's authority to fully track the story of what had happened, at his base began to spread quietly through certain circles within the special operations community, the details heavily classified, but the broad strokes impossible to fully contain. A single operator working alone uncovering a sophisticated foreign intelligence network that had been operating undetected for years, saving 6 SEALs from a deadly ambush, and then stopping a catastrophic attack on a critical fuel and munitions depot in the span of a single night. Claire never sought recognition for any of it. She declined every opportunity for a formal commendation ceremony, insisting that her work required her identity to remain protected, that public acknowledgement would compromise her ability to continue operating in the shadows, where her particular skills were most valuable. But among those who knew, among the small circle of operators and commanders who understood exactly what had happened that night and exactly what it had taken to stop it, her name became something quietly legendary, spoken with a reverence usually reserved for the kind of soldiers whose stories never made it into official records, but who nonetheless shaped the outcomes of conflicts in ways few people would ever fully appreciate. Caldwell, for his part, found himself changed by the events of that night in ways he was still discovering months later. He had spent 28 years believing he understood the nature of loyalty, of trust, of the bonds that held a military command together, and in the span of a single endless night, he had watched those beliefs tested and broken and rebuilt in ways that left him a fundamentally different commander than he had been before Ghost Team's distress call first came through his radio. He thought often about the moment he had grabbed Claire's rifle strap, hauled her to her feet, and threatened her with federal prison, consumed by fury and fear, and the desperate need to make sense of a night that had already defied every rule he understood about warfare. He thought about how close he had come to letting that initial judgment, that instinctive assumption, based on nothing more than surprise and unfamiliarity, blind him to the truth of who she actually was and what she had actually done for his men. "I judged you based on nothing," he told her once months later, when their paths crossed again during a briefing at a regional command post. Neither of them had expected to be it simultaneously. "I saw a woman I didn't recognize sitting calmly beside a weapon I associated with a very different kind of operator, and I let that surprise turn into accusation before I ever gave you a chance to explain yourself." "You're not the first person to do that," Claire said. "And honestly, General, you won't be the last person I encounter who does it either. I stopped expecting people to see past their assumptions a long time ago. What matters more to me is what happens after the assumption. Some people cling to it no matter what evidence stands in front of them. Others, like you, are willing to let the evidence change their mind, even when changing their mind costs them something. That's rarer than you'd think, and it's worth more than you probably realize." "I keep thinking about that pin," Caldwell admitted. "The moment I recognized it, everything shifted. Before that, I was ready to have you arrested. After that, I understood I was looking at someone who had sacrificed more than I could probably ever fully understand." "The pin doesn't matter," Claire said, and there was something quietly fierce in the way she said it. "General, respectfully, the pin is just metal. What should have mattered from the very first moment was that 6 of your men were alive when they should have been dead, and the only reasonable explanation for that was someone willing to take an extraordinary risk to save them. The pin just gave you permission to believe what the evidence had already told you. That's something worth thinking about the next time you meet someone whose actions don't match the assumptions you walked in with." Caldwell carried that lesson with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that surfaced every time he found himself tempted toward a quick judgment, every time an unfamiliar face or an unexpected circumstance threatened to override the evidence actually standing in front of him. He thought of Claire Whitmore often, in the years that followed, this quiet, extraordinary woman who had walked into his command tent as a stranger. He nearly had arrested and walked out as someone whose courage and integrity had fundamentally reshaped his understanding of what leadership and loyalty actually meant. The network Doyle had been part of was eventually dismantled almost entirely, though certain threads remained unresolved, certain names never fully connected to the faces behind them, certain questions that would linger unanswered for years within the classified files documenting an operation that had come devastatingly close to succeeding on a scale that would have cost far more American lives than the 6 who had nearly died in that first Mountain Valley ambush. Claire continued her work in the shadows, her name known only to a select few. Her contributions to countless operations across the years that followed, never fully appreciated by anyone outside the small circle of people who understood exactly what she had sacrificed and exactly what she had accomplished. General Nathan Caldwell went on to complete his career with a deeper, more hard-won wisdom than he had carried into that fateful night, eventually retiring after 3 more years of service. His final assessment of his own career forever colored by the lessons of a single impossible evening, when everything he thought he understood about trust, betrayal, and courage had been tested and rebuilt in the span of a few devastating hours. He never forgot the sight of her sitting calmly on that crate, cleaning her rifle as though nothing extraordinary had happened moments before he stormed in and grabbed her strap and demanded to know who she was, moments before his entire understanding of the battlefield of loyalty, of the quiet courage that so often goes unrecognized and unrewarded, was permanently and irrevocably changed. Lieutenant Commander Claire Whitmore never sought the spotlight, never wanted the recognition that so many others might have craved after accomplishing what she had accomplished that night, saving 6 lives, exposing a network of traitors within an American command, and stopping a catastrophic attack that could have cost dozens more lives at a critical logistics hub. She simply did the work, quietly, relentlessly, carrying the weight of impossible decisions and impossible risks with a discipline and grace that few people would ever fully understand or appreciate. And in doing so, she became exactly the kind of soldier that history rarely remembers by name. But that history is nonetheless built upon the silent warriors whose sacrifices hold everything else together, whose courage asks for nothing in return except the simple knowledge that the people they protected made it home safely. And on the nights when Caldwell found himself unable to sleep, when the weight of command pressed too heavily against his chest, he thought of her still standing on that distant ridge 2,000 yards from 6 men who should have died, calm and steady and utterly certain in a moment when certainty seemed impossible. And he understood with a clarity that had taken him 28 years and 1 impossible night to fully grasp that true strength was never about the size of the weapon in someone's hands or the reputation attached to their name. It was about showing up again and again in the moments when everyone else had already given up hope, and doing what needed to be done without ever asking for the credit that was rightfully theirs. That was the legacy Claire Whitmore left behind in every command she touched, every life she saved, every network she exposed, whether the world ever knew her name or not. And it was a legacy that General Nathan Caldwell carried with him for the rest of his life. A permanent reminder that the greatest heroes are so often the ones standing quietly in the shadows, watching over everyone else, asking for nothing except the chance to keep doing the work that mattered most.